Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jeffrey Hazelwood. Natalie Henderson, Carter Davis, and Jeffrey Hazelwood are three residents of Roswell. Natalie and Carter are friendly, intelligent, and optimistic. Natalie is actively involved in school activities, often representing the school at social events, while Carter balances academics and sports. Jeffrey, on the other hand, struggles with his studies, with his grades and academic performance significantly lower than his peers. As a teenager, Jeffrey was sent to a military-style school, and after graduating, he remained unemployed for several years. He later found a job in government, which allowed him to support himself. Jeffrey had a challenging childhood. He was born on July 10, 1996, into difficult circumstances. His mother, Sherry, was only 19 years old when he was born, and Sherry's partner abandoned her before Jeffrey was born. During her pregnancy, Sherry struggled with drug use. Those around her realized that she was incapable of caring for a child. As a result, when Jeffrey was 6 months old, he moved in with his grandparents. Although Jeffrey's grandparents loved him, his troubled relationship with his mother leading to him being labeled a difficult child. Throughout his teenage years, there were many incidents reported in Jeffrey's family. Jeffrey frequently engaged in dangerous activities. On one occasion, he wrote a note saying he was going to spend a few days in the wilderness testing his survival skills. In another disturbing incident, he took his grandfather's gun, prompting neighbors to call the police. His actions increasingly worried his grandparents, who attempted to hide the weapons. Despite their efforts, Jeffrey, who was smart and determined, successfully broke into a safe and took the knives and swords he loved. By 2013, when Jeffrey turned 16, his grandmother felt the need to report his troubling behavior to the police, likely out of concern for her safety and that of others. Just weeks earlier, he had warned her that his patience would eventually wear thin, and he might hurt someone, although he didn't specify who or when. As a result, Jeffrey was sent to a military school. After returning, he entered a relationship that he cherished deeply. His social media accounts were filled with expressions of love for his girlfriend, mixed with images of wolves, dark quotes, and posts about anger and mortality. No one seemed to notice or help Jeffrey. Eventually, the city of Roswell had a serious problem. On August 1, 2016, a Monday morning, a driver was making a delivery at the local grocery store. At 6 a.m., just as he approached the store, his peaceful morning turned into a nightmare. As he turned the corner toward the delivery area, he was shocked to see two bodies lying side by side in a parking lot, both dead and covered in blood. Panicked, he called the police to report what he had seen. Police quickly arrived at the scene and discovered the bodies of two young people. A man and a woman, both dead. Police spotted two cars parked nearby, and when they ran the license plates, they discovered they belonged to Carter Davis and Natalie Henderson. The young couple came from middle-class families, and neither had a criminal record or any violations. The investigation began with a search of the vehicle and a review of surveillance camera footage from the supermarket. The video showed Carter and Natalie driving through the parking lot at approximately 3 a.m. before disappearing behind the building. Additionally, just minutes before they arrived, a silver Honda had parked in front of the store. After Carter and Natalie passed the Honda, a tall man with long, unkempt hair got out of the Honda and followed them on foot, but then disappeared from view of the surveillance camera. His facial features were unclear, and the video did not capture his license plate number. All police could determine was that the car was silver, a 1990 or 1998 model, and had mismatched wheels. Police contacted the Bureau of Investigation for assistance in finding a suspect. The task was difficult because they needed to compile a list of all Honda owners in the city. After sifting through the data, they narrowed the list down to about 650 vehicles and their owners. This process of elimination was long and difficult, requiring patience and effort on the part of the police. However, their persistence paid off. On August 3, 2016, just 2 days after the discovery of Carter and Natalie's bodies, police located a driver's license that belonged to a Honda owner. This owner, Jeffrey Hazelwood, 20, lived in Roswell and was known to police because of his long black hair. His grandparents were shocked when some police officers knocked on their front door. Their surprise quickly turned to concern when the officers asked about their grandson Jeffrey. They informed the police that they did not know where he was. Jeffrey's grandparents said that they had kicked him out of the house 2 days ago. The police then investigated and found that Jeffrey was staying at his girlfriend's house. They knew the address and set up a perimeter around the house. After finding the boy's car parked in the driveway, the police waited nearby, patiently waiting for Jeffrey to show up. Hours later, Jeffrey finally came out of the house, got into his car and drove away. Undercover police observed Jeffrey as he arrived at a gas station, walked around, and changed his clothes. At that point, officers surrounded him and arrested him on suspicion of the murders of Natalie Henderson and Carter Davis before he could react. Initially, Jeffrey denied killing anyone, but after being held for several days, he was questioned by Officer Jennifer Bennett, who was assigned to Jeffrey's case. During this interrogation, several strange details came to light. When arrested, Jeffrey insisted that he was an innocent bystander and that he had not killed anyone. However, during questioning, he claimed that another man had pressured him into committing the crime. As the interrogation continued, he stopped mentioning his accomplice. Additionally, Jeffrey claimed that a voice in his head had told him to kill Natalie and Carter. Despite Jeffrey's numerous lies and confusing statements, Police Officer Bennett was able to piece together what happened on the night of August 1st. Jeffrey said his troubles began when his grandparents kicked him out of the house. To clear his head, he went to a local Waffle House, but since he had nowhere to stay for the night, he decided to park at the local grocery store. He arrived around 3 a.m. and sat in his car. While he was sitting there, 2 cars pulled into the parking lot, drove past him, circled the building. Feeling bored and lonely, Jeffrey decided to follow them on foot. After the 2 cars parked side by side, Carter Davis got out of the car and got into the back seat of Natalie's car. Natalie then joined him in the back seat, saying they wanted some private time together. Unbeknownst to them, Jeffrey was hiding behind the nearby electrical panel, observing their interaction. However, Jeffrey climbed up a nearby service ladder to get a better view from the roof of the car. Jeffrey later claimed that he did not watch for long. Sadly, Jeffrey obtained his grandfather's gun after breaking into a safe just before being kicked out of his house. What he did next was horrific. He climbed down from the roof, approached Natalie's car, and demanded that Carter exit the vehicle. He struck Carter with the gun. In that moment of panic, Jeffrey realized Carter was taller and stronger, putting him at a disadvantage in a physical struggle. In a shocking act, he raised the gun and shot Carter in the head at close range, then ordered Natalie to get out of the car. Without detailing what he did to her, Jeffrey later shot Natalie in the back of the head after she turned away. After both victims were dead, he ransacked Natalie's car, took her wallet, and drove away. However, Jeffrey's criminal activities did not stop there. That night, he was found at a gas station using Natalie's credit card to fill up his car. Surveillance cameras even recorded Jeffrey wearing a mask to hide his identity. During questioning, he stated that despite having the mask and gun, he did not take any further action. Jeffrey stated that he needed the mask to hide his identity from the person who ordered him to kill Natalie and Carter. After stopping at the gas station, he returned to the bodies. He placed the bodies on the asphalt as they had been found that morning. He then called his girlfriend and asked if he could stay with her until he could sort out his family issues. She had no idea that he had just killed someone, and she welcomed him into her home. Eventually, the police tracked him down and arrested him. During the trial, his behavior was highly erratic. He talked to himself, claimed to hear voices, and even spoke with a British accent. At one point sat shaking, made erratic head movements, and talked to himself. He was also observed conversing with an imaginary dog and pretending to hit it on the head. At a later hearing, Officer Bennett shared Jeffrey's confession, revealing the disturbing details he described about that night. He said he pulled Natalie out of the car, forced her onto the hood, and then shot her in the head. The defense argued that Jeffrey exhibited symptoms of schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, Asperger's syndrome, and dissociative identity disorder. While each of these conditions can be controlled individually, the combination of all four conditions makes him an extremely unstable person. However, none of these conditions had been formally diagnosed. As such, he was deemed competent to stand trial and, with appropriate treatment, could become stable enough to understand the proceedings. Given the overwhelming amount of evidence, including forensic material from surveillance camera footage and seized items, the proof against him was strong. The prosecution quickly built a strong case against Jeffrey. The initial trial was scheduled for September 9, 2016, but it was postponed multiple times because he needed treatment. He was moved to a secure psychiatric hospital to continue his care until a new trial date was established. A hearing was conducted to evaluate Jeffrey's competence, particularly his ability to understand the legal proceedings. While he occasionally rocked in his chair, psychologists could not pinpoint his specific mental disorders. However, they diagnosed him with psychosis, which is a disorder that causes a disconnection from reality rather than a mental illness itself. Finally, on May 17, 2017, Jeffrey appeared in court as he was nearing recovery. He was not allowed to speak during treatment, so his attorney spoke on his behalf. The judge offered him a plea deal regarding the murders of Carter and Natalie, which Jeffrey accepted. He was then sentenced to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole, ensuring that Jeffrey would spend the rest of his life in prison or a mental hospital. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Rowan Ford. Rowan Ford was born on April 11, 1998, in San Diego, California. Her parents divorced when she was young, and her mother, Colleen, moved with her to a small town called Stella in Missouri. Later, her mom met a man named David, and they got married. Colleen had several children from a previous marriage, and soon after their wedding, she and David had a daughter together. Altogether, Rowan had 2 sisters and 2 brothers, and they shared a very close bond. She spent a lot of time outdoors, riding her bike around town, enjoying swimming, and indulging in her passion for drawing. She also liked going to Sunday school at the local church, where she always volunteered to help other kids who had some issues with their tasks. In November 2007, when Rowan was 9 years old, she was in the 4th grade at the local elementary school. Her mom worked the night shift at a store, while her stepdad spent most of the day on the farm, which made Rowan often fend for herself, making her very independent. On November 2nd, she stayed home alone as usual. Her mom went to work, and her stepdad hadn't returned from the farm yet. The next morning, around 9 a.m., Colleen came home from her night shift and checked Rowan's room, but her daughter wasn't there. She asked her husband where her daughter was, and he said she had asked him if she could have a sleepover at a friend's house, and he had let her go. He didn't even ask the friend's name because their town was very small, and he wasn't worried about anything happening to her. But Colleen started to worry and decided to check with all of Rowan's friends. Since there were only a few streets in their town, it didn't take long, but none of them had seen her, and she hadn't stayed over at any of their houses, which made her mother even more concerned. Colleen searched the whole town but couldn't find her daughter. She went back home and told her husband that Rowan was nowhere to be found. She asked him to call the police and report her missing, but he reassured her that everything was fine and that she would come home soon. After waiting for several more hours with no sign of Rowan, Colleen took matters into her own hands and dialed 911 herself. The local sheriff immediately organized a search operation. He went to their house to speak with David, and as he was the last person to see Rowan before she disappeared, David said that on that evening, while he was working on the farm with his colleague Christopher, their mutual friend Nathan came by. They all decided to go to David's place to have some drinks and play pool. They stopped by the store, bought some alcohol, and went to David's house, where they spent several hours. Later in the night, Christopher asked Nathan to drive him home to the neighboring town, where his trailer was. They persuaded David to join them to continue the fun. Before leaving the house, he checked on Rowan in her room, seeing that she was asleep. David left with his friends, and they stopped by the store again to grab more alcohol and headed to Christopher's trailer, where they continued drinking for about an hour. After that, David decided to head home and asked Nathan to give him a ride. Nathan agreed but chose to take back roads instead of the main highway. By that time Nathan was quite drunk and didn't want to risk encountering the police. Nathan dropped David off and drove home. David went straight to bed. Soon after, he was awakened by Rowan, who asked if she could sleep over at a friend's house. Without much thought, he agreed and fell back asleep. Police approached this story with some skepticism. What puzzled them most was the fact that a 9-year-old girl decided to go to her friend's house in the middle of the night, and her stepfather let her go without even asking which friend she was talking about. The sheriff considered that David might be hiding something or directly involved in Rowan's disappearance, but he had no evidence to support this theory. Police searched the town and its surroundings until late at night. Local residents immediately joined the search, as they all knew Rowan's family and wanted to help. The population of Stella was only about 150 people, so news of her disappearance spread throughout the county. People were used to being able to let their children play outside without a worry, as nothing ever happened in such a quiet place. But now that Rowan vanished without a trace, and the police were unable to find her for a whole day, the residents of Stella were in a state of panic. The search for Rowan yielded no results on the first day. However, the investigation progressed on November 4th when the police spoke with Christopher in a neighboring town. He corroborated David's account, but revealed that David had not contacted him to inform him of Rowan's disappearance. Christopher stated he had not spoken with Rowan or her friends since that evening. Despite an expanded search with more volunteers, the police failed to find Rowan or any clues about her disappearance. The following day, the FBI joined the investigation while the local police continued searching the town and surrounding areas. As a result of growing skepticism towards David's account, detectives started focusing on a potential abduction. They spoke with all of Rowan's friends and verified that none of them had seen her on the night she went missing. As investigators questioned David, his account raised even more suspicions. David's details were inconsistent and contradictory. He altered the timeline of his whereabouts that night on multiple occasions. Additionally, David speculates that it is possible that Rowan left without his permission, which makes his story even more suspicious. During their investigation, FBI agents found out that David had borrowed his mother's car on the night of Rowan's disappearance, a detail he initially left out when questioned by the police. This new information led the authorities to seize both his mother's car and his own pickup truck for forensic examination. But unfortunately, no evidence was discovered. As part of the investigation, detectives wanted to speak with Christopher and Nathan again, since both had been with David that evening. Christopher was invited to the police station for further questioning, where he recounted the same story as before. He also agreed to take a polygraph test, which showed no signs of dishonesty. After leaving the police station and returning to work, Christopher noticed Sheriff Clark's car and signaled for him to stop. As the sheriff of Witten, where Christopher lived, Clark had known him since childhood. Sheriff Clark was close friends with Christopher's foster parents and was someone Christopher had always looked up to and sought advice from in times of need. Sheriff Clark met with Christopher to discuss Rowan's disappearance. Although familiar with the case, Clark hadn't been directly involved since the investigation was led by the Stella Department. During their conversation, Clark noticed that Christopher was acting strangely, which led him to suspect that Christopher might be hiding something. Given the gravity of the situation and Rowan's uncertain fate, Clark shared his concerns with the FBI. His call prompted investigators to consider the possibility that Christopher might be withholding crucial information that could link Rowan's stepfather to her disappearance. They wondered if Christopher's actions were directed by Rowan's stepfather to lie, and whether Christopher feared being seen as an accomplice if he told the truth. Sheriff Clark told the FBI agents that he had a close relationship with Christopher and offered to help persuade him to cooperate. That evening, Christopher visited Colleen's house to ask about the search progress. FBI agents also arrived to speak with Colleen again and saw Christopher there. They asked him questions, and he repeated his previous account. However, Christopher then mentioned for the first time that he didn't rule out David's possible involvement in Rowan's disappearance. He expressed his willingness to help uncover the truth, even if it was terrible, and suggested wearing a wire to talk to David and try to get him to confess. The detectives decided against this approach. Instead, they asked Christopher to suggest locations where David might have hidden Rowan's body. Christopher provided several locations, which the police searched the next morning. Meanwhile, FBI agents questioned David again, but he continued to deny any involvement. Detectives searched Christopher's home for leads, but the search yielded no results. Meanwhile, Christopher visited the sheriff's office to discuss his encounter with the FBI with Clark. During their conversation, the sheriff sensed that Christopher was holding back information. After their meeting, Clark reached out to the detectives again, suggesting that Christopher might be withholding crucial information that helped prove David's involvement in the case. The FBI agents asked the sheriff to persuade Christopher to open up, as he had been in regular contact with Clark to discuss the case. It seemed that Christopher wanted to share important details but was hesitant to do so for unknown reasons. The following day, November 7th, the police asked Christopher to return to the station. They requested his permission to search a safe located in David's house, where Christopher had been living temporarily and still had some belongings. Christopher agreed to the search and also allowed the police to search his trailer and car. Additionally, Christopher voluntarily provided a DNA sample and agreed to answer the detectives' questions again. During the questioning, he was asked to confirm David's story, but this time, Christopher revealed that his friend's account was not entirely accurate. The investigators then pressed him to disclose what really happened that evening. Christopher became agitated when the police treated him like a suspect in Rowan's disappearance. He refused to continue the conversation and left the station after warning the detectives that he might hire a lawyer. Later that evening, Christopher met with Sheriff Clark to express his concerns about the detectives' behavior. Clark acknowledged Christopher's right to remain silent but explained that the police were doing everything possible to find Rowan. Christopher stated that he would no longer cooperate with the detectives and would only speak with Clark if he had any further information to share. Clark continued to encourage Christopher to open up, and eventually, Christopher broke down in tears, claiming that he loved Rowan and would never harm her. During his time living with the David family, Christopher formed a close bond with Rowan and the other children. They grew to treat him like one of their own, even affectionately referring to him as Uncle Christopher. Sheriff Clark realized that Christopher was on the verge of revealing crucial information, but just as he was about to open up, a visitor arrived at the police station, briefly distracting Clark and causing Christopher to leave. Sheriff Clark reached out to the FBI, updating them on his conversation with Christopher. Clark explained that Christopher was almost ready to disclose what he knew, but warned that pressuring him too hard could lead to him becoming defensive and seeking the help of a lawyer. Clark recommended giving Christopher time to reflect, and the detectives agreed. The search for Rowan continued the following day but yielded no results. However, a new clue came on November 9th, exactly 1 week after her disappearance. Search teams converged on a remote area near the town of Powell, about 10 miles from Stella, and made a significant discovery in the fields and woods, a large pit in the ground. When authorities searched the area, they found Rowan's body hidden under leaves and debris. She was not wearing any clothing from the waist down except for a pair of stockings. A medical examination revealed signs of strangulation and evidence of a sexual assault. After the discovery, FBI agents reached out to Sheriff Clark, asking him to speak with Christopher again. Hoping Christopher would now be more forthcoming. Sheriff Clark learned that earlier that morning, Christopher had visited the station, looking for him, and told other officers that he needed to speak with Clark urgently. Sheriff Clark then began searching for Christopher, checking all his usual locations, but he was nowhere to be found. This continued until Christopher contacted Sheriff Clark himself, sounding distressed and asking if he was being followed. Christopher explained that after hearing about Rowan's body, he had driven around town to clear his head and noticed a gray car following him. Sheriff Clark assures Christopher that he knows nothing about the surveillance and suggests they meet in person. When they met, Christopher appeared nervous and expressed concerns for his safety. He feared that with Rowan's body found, he might be accused of murder and that someone might seek revenge against him. Clark took Christopher to the police station, and he said that now when the case had been classified as a homicide, it was time for Christopher to reveal everything he knew. However, when Clark asked Christopher to share what David had done to Rowan, Christopher became emotional and hesitant to talk at the station. He explained that there were too many people around and suggested they move to a quieter location. Clark agreed, and they drove to a small bridge a few miles outside of town. Once they arrived, Christopher asked Clark to handcuff him. Clark was surprised but tried to reassure Christopher that it wasn't necessary. Christopher insists that what he is about to say will change everything and that Clark will then have to arrest him. Christopher then began recounting the events of that night. He told Clark that he, Nathan, and David had gone to his trailer to continue drinking. Later, his friends decided it was time to head home. Nathan gave David a ride, and they chose to take back roads to avoid the police. Christopher had shocked Clark that he had intended to sexually assault Rowan. To carry out his plan, Christopher took advantage of the time when his friends were busy taking a detour through the field. He drove straight to David's house via the main highway. Under the cover of darkness, he slipped into Rowan's room, picked her up, and quietly transported her to his vehicle, carefully avoiding detection as she slept. When they reached his trailer, he sexually assaulted Rowan. This was interrupted when Rowan regained consciousness and tried her best to free herself, but to no avail. During the crime, Christopher took precautions to avoid recognition, deliberately choosing to keep the lights off and maintain his silence. He originally planned to return Rowan to her home under the guise of innocence, but under the illumination of a bright moon, Rowan finally laid eyes on Christopher as he transported her from the trailer. He grabbed a rope, resorted to force to resolve his predicament, and took Rowan's life with his bare hands. He frantically thought of ways to cover up his crime. He got in his car and began driving around the county, pondering methods of disposing of the body. He then remembered a large pit near a neighboring town and headed in that direction. When he arrived, he dumped Rowan's body in the hole and attempted to cover it with tree branches. Returning to the trailer, Christopher discovered traces of Rowan's blood on his clothes and mattress. He also realized he needed to dispose of her pants, underwear, and the rope used to kill her. He gathered these items and placed them in a large barrel, intending to burn them. However, he quickly reconsidered, realizing that a large fire would likely attract unwanted attention. Instead, Christopher dragged the barrel into a shed, closed the door, and started the fire inside. This revelation shocked Clark, who had previously suspected David of committing the crime and believed Christopher was withholding information. It was difficult for Clark to accept that a man he had known for nearly 20 years, a man with 3 young children of his own, was capable of such brutality. Although Christopher appears to be a good-natured man, his true nature is much more worrying. After finishing his story, Christopher willingly went to the police station with Clark. Once there, Christopher repeated his confession to the FBI agents and was subsequently arrested for murder. He also gave the authorities permission to search his trailer and car. As he concluded his confession, Christopher expressed regret over his actions and stated that he had cried uncontrollably the following day. The detectives then informed David about Christopher's confession. Given David's suspicious behavior and inconsistent statements, they suspected he might be covering for his friend. However, during interrogation, David revealed a shocking new testimony. David claimed that when he found Rowan missing from her room, he suspected Christopher might have taken her. He took his mother's car and drove to Christopher's trailer. He found Rowan lying on the bed. Christopher leaned towards her. Instead of rescuing Rowan, David joined in and also sexually assaulted her. He then helped Christopher kill her and dispose of her body. David reported that during that traumatic incident, his brain went into shock, and he had no memory of the night for several days. The detectives, surprised by this new information, re-questioned Christopher to verify David's claim. However, Christopher maintained that David was not involved and that incident unfolded as he had initially described. The inconsistencies puzzled the detectives, but Christopher's account still matched incident that had occurred. Medical examination revealed that the victim was strangled with a thin rope, a detail that only the killer would be aware of. A search of the trailer led to the discovery of a barrel containing ashes, and hair similar to Rowan's was found in Christopher's car. Although investigators were still uncertain about the truthfulness of each man's account, both David and Christopher made incriminating statements. As a result, David was also arrested, and the case were sent to court for further proceedings. During the trial, Christopher requested that his statements be excluded from the case, arguing that he was not aware they could be used against him and that the police had violated his rights. However, the judge rejected this request, as all of Christopher's conversations with investigators were voluntary. Christopher also attempted to present mitigating circumstances, citing his difficult childhood as a factor. He had been shuffled between biological and foster parents from a young age, which had a significant impact on him. Despite these efforts, Christopher was unable to avoid punishment. In 2012, 5 years after the murder, Christopher was sentenced to death. He appealed the sentence, but was unsuccessful. In contrast, David's situation was more complex. Although he admitted to assaulting and killing Rowan, his account conflicted with Christopher's statements, creating a significant problem. If the prosecution had charged David with murder, it could have potentially led to Christopher's conviction being overturned, allowing David to avoid accountability as well. However, due to the lack of concrete evidence, such as DNA, in fact, they were still uncertain about David's involvement. Although it was possible that David might have collaborated with Christopher in committing the crime, there was no supporting evidence for this theory. To minimize the risk of overturning Christopher's sentence, the prosecution made the difficult decision to reduce David's charges. As a result, David pleaded guilty to 2 lesser charges: child endangerment and obstruction of justice. David received an 11 years prison sentence, with a minimum of 5 years to be served. This outcome sparked widespread outrage, as many felt that if David was indeed involved in the murder, his punishment was disproportionately lenient. Unfortunately, this sentence is now final, and it is unlikely that David will face retrial for this case. Christopher remains in prison awaiting execution. But it's uncertain whether the death penalty will be carried out due to the often lengthy time between sentencing and execution, which can span decades, meaning he might spend the rest of his life in prison instead. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore, the case of Angie Houseman. Angie Houseman was born on February 18, 1984, in St. Louis, Missouri. Her father had left the family before her birth, and as a result, she never had the opportunity to know him. When Angie was 1 year old, her mother married a man named Ronald, and they had a son together. Angie got along well with her stepfather and was very close to her younger brother. Angie was a friendly and outgoing child who easily made friends with those around her. She lived with her family in a quiet suburban area of St. Louis. In 1993, at the age of 9, Angie attended the 4th grade at a local elementary school, which was just over a mile from her home. To get to school, she would take the bus from a nearby stop, and her parents felt relatively safe allowing her to travel alone due to the stop's proximity to their house. Angie usually walked to the bus stop with other neighborhood children, and after school, they would be watched over by several parents who would keep an eye on them from their windows as they made their way home. A tradition established in the neighborhood was that locals would watch over children and make sure they got home safely from the bus stop. On November 18th, Angie followed her usual routine and attended school, finishing at 3 p.m. She boarded the school bus with some neighborhood kids and got off at her stop. The other kids lived closer to the stop, so they walked ahead, leaving Angie to walk the remaining short distance home alone. However, Angie failed to arrive home, which was unusual. Her parents started to worry about half an hour later. They decided to walk along Angie's usual route from their house to the bus stop to see if they could find her. During their search, they spoke with other kids from Angie's school. They confirmed that she had gotten off the bus with them and was walking toward her home. Her parents also talked to neighbors who usually kept an eye on the kids but were busy that day and didn't see anything. Angie's parents and their friends combed the area but couldn't find her. As night began to fall, Angie's parents decided to call the police for assistance. Police officers quickly joined the search for Angie. The cold weather made it unlikely that she would have wandered off on her own, so they initially focused on the possibility of something more serious happening to her. A recent kidnapping in the neighborhood, involving an 11-year-old girl just 10 days earlier, further heightened their concerns. The man had approached the girl as she got off the school bus and tried to drag her into the bushes, but she managed to escape. Since the man was still at large, the police considered the possibility that he might be involved in Angie's disappearance. The police brought in dogs trained to track scents, and the dogs picked up Angie's scent near the bus stop. The dogs followed the scent for about half the distance to Angie's house, but then lost it. This suggested that Angie might have gotten into a vehicle at that point, which made the police think that she might have been abducted. The police also used helicopters with special sensors to search the area and looked along the banks of a small stream near Angie's home, but they did not find Angie or any of her belongings. The first day of the search for Angie yielded no results, prompting the police to reach out to the media for assistance. As a result, news of her disappearance spread rapidly throughout the city, generating over 300 calls to the police department within 24 hours. More than 20 additional officers were brought in to help handle the large number of new leads in the case. Despite this effort, none of the leads led to Angie's discovery. Detectives explored every possible scenario, and from the early stages of the investigation, they began to scrutinize Angie's stepfather. He denied any involvement in her disappearance and claimed he would never harm her. To clear his name, he agreed to a polygraph test and other checks, urging the police to focus on finding Angie rather than wasting time on him. The investigation also led to the discovery of Angie's biological father, who had never had any direct contact with his daughter. However, Her mother reported that he had been seen driving past their house on multiple occasions, watching Angie play outside. Although this behavior raised suspicions among detectives, the man had a solid alibi that checked out. On the third day of Angie's disappearance, the FBI stepped in to assist the police department, which then allocated even more officers to the case. Everyone realized that something awful must have occurred to Angie, as it was unlikely she could have survived on her own in the freezing weather. A new lead emerged. Someone reported a suspicious man driving a blue sedan slowly through Angie's neighborhood. The description of this man matched the one given by a girl who had narrowly escaped an abduction attempt just 10 days before Angie vanished. The police created a composite sketch of the suspect and featured it in the news. Volunteers distributed thousands of flyers with the sketch. But the man's identity remained a mystery. As the case gained national attention, it was covered on television, attracting even more leads. The police carefully examined each new lead, but none of them led to Angie's discovery. The case also drew in psychics. They began calling Angie's home to share their alleged visions. One psychic claimed that Angie was alive and even provided a specific location where she being held, a large national park 25 miles from her home. However, the detectives did not give any credence to these claims. A reward of $10,000 was offered to anyone who could provide information about Angie's disappearance, which led to a large number of tips being submitted. During the investigation, detectives discovered a concerning detail. Angie had told her teacher a few days before she vanished that she planned to go on a nature trip with her uncle. However, Angie's parents were unaware of any uncle, and it seemed Angie had fabricated this story. This led investigators to consider the possibility that Angie might have known her abductor beforehand and referred to them as her uncle. Unfortunately, the conversation with her teacher did not provide any information about this mysterious individual. The investigation stalled, with no progress made in the following days. On November 27th, 9 days after Angie's disappearance, an important development in the case was found. A hunter contacted the police, reported that he found a body in the woods of a national park. Upon arriving at the scene, police were met with a disturbing sight. A young girl's body was tied to a tree, naked, with her head completely wrapped in tape except for her nose. Her hands were also bound with handcuffs. Near where the body was found, they found a bag containing personal items, which were quickly identified as Angie's remains. Among the belongings were notebooks with her name. After being transferred to the medical examiner, a detailed examination of the body revealed additional shocking facts. The removal of tape from her head uncovered a piece of underwear lodged in her mouth. The autopsy results indicated that Angie's death had occurred only a few hours before the body was discovered. This suggested she was held captive for 9 days, only to be left to freeze to death at the scene. Experts further determined that Angie suffered numerous injuries and had been sexually assaulted during her ordeal. Forensic analysts carefully inspected every proof collected from the crime scene and identified a fingerprint on the tape used to wrap Angie's head. They cross-referenced this evidence against potential suspects in their database, but unfortunately, this led to no new leads. The discovery of the body accelerated the police investigation, prompting the allocation of additional resources to help solve the case. The community was shocked by the extreme brutality of the crime and was deeply concerned for their children's safety, with many escorting their kids to bus stops and keeping a close watch over them at all times. A few days after Angie's discovery, concerns escalated further. On December 1st, 10-year-old Cassidy went missing from a nearby town, just 10 miles from Angie's home. Cassidy asked her mother for permission to visit friends who lived just a few hundred yards away, but then she disappeared. Cassidy's disappearance sparked an extensive police investigation, and detectives began to suspect the possibility that Cassidy's case might be linked to a serial killer. Although they considered the possibility that the same person was behind both abductions, they lacked concrete evidence to support this theory. 10 days later, Cassidy's body was found in St. Louis, wrapped in bed sheets and covered with a pink curtain. The cause of death was severe head injuries. Despite efforts, detectives couldn't find any leads to the killer. Furthermore, they started questioning whether the same person was responsible for both Angie's and Cassidy's deaths. Detectives suspected they might be dealing with two different killers due to the distinct characteristics of the crimes. Around the same time, they identified a 37-year-old man named Gary as a potential suspect. Gary had previously attempted to abduct a girl just before Angie went missing and regularly traveled to St. Louis for work. The man was initially investigated for potential involvement in the murders of Angie and Cassidy, but he had an alibi for the time of their disappearances. Although he was not connected to these crimes, he did admit to assaulting 4 other girls and was subsequently sentenced to 5 years in prison. In February of the following year, a significant development in the case was revealed when detectives finally found Cassidy's body. Nearby, they found tire tracks that were identified as coming from a pickup truck model frequently used by a prominent car rental company. The distinctive vehicles were easily recognizable due to their vibrant brand logos. With this new information, detectives interviewed residents in Cassidy's neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen one of these pickup trucks. One woman reported seeing a vehicle from the car rental company near her neighbor's house about a week after Cassidy's disappearance. Police found a woman who lived with her husband and brother at the house they were investigating. When questioned, the woman claimed neither she nor her husband, brother had rented the pickup associated with the crime, and they had no involvement in the case. However, detectives were skeptical of her claims and obtained a search warrant for the house. Upon searching the house, investigators found blood traces from the victim, Cassidy, in the basement, along with the murder weapon. Further investigation revealed that the woman's brother, Thomas, was the one who had rented the pickup in question. Initially, Thomas denied any involvement but eventually confessed when confronted with the evidence. According to Thomas's confession, Cassidy had come to his door, wanting to invite his nephews out to play. He invited her into the house and led her to the basement, where he attempted to assault her. When Cassidy screamed, Thomas struck her with a heavy object and then covered her body with bed sheets. After committing the crime, Thomas went to work as usual. Upon returning home, his sister told him that she had discovered the body in the basement. She made it clear that she didn't want to know the details of what happened and insisted that the body be disposed of immediately. Cassidy's body remained in the basement for a week due to ongoing searches, and Thomas was too afraid to move it. Once things had calmed down, he rented a pickup truck and took the body to St. Louis. He hid her body there. Thomas was eventually sentenced to death for his crimes but died in prison several years later due to illness. Despite being questioned about Angie's case, he maintained his innocence, leading detectives to conclude that the crimes were unrelated. The investigation stalled for many months with few leads coming in. Years after Angie's murder, detectives faced another challenge when the reward for information was set to expire, sparking concerns that the public would stop providing tips and assistance in the case. However, in 2001, a local businessman donated $250,000 as a reward for information on Angie's case. This large sum of money caused a spike in many information to the police. But unfortunately, there are no clues to help solve the case. In 2001, a new development emerged in the Angie Houseman case when Corey Fox, an inmate, turned himself in and confessed to multiple murders, including the murder of Angie Houseman. Corey Fox provided detailed information about Angie's abduction and captivity, including being tied to a tree, with her underwear used as a gag. However, upon further questioning, detectives found inconsistencies in his confession, such as incorrectly stating that Angie's hands were restrained with plastic handcuffs instead of iron ones. Further investigation revealed that Corey Fox also fabricated parts of his confession, possibly due to extensive media coverage of Angie's case. Another tragic case happened in 2002. The abduction and murder of a 6-year-old girl briefly sparked renewed interest in Angie's case. However, it was soon determined that the two cases were unrelated. The perpetrator in the 2002 case was a neighbor. He quickly confessed during interrogation, while Angie's case remained unsolved. Several years after Angie's murder, detectives reopened the case in 2007. They re-examined the documents and found a peculiar detail. A man named Roger Martin was in a parked car near the crime scene when Angie's body was discovered. When questioned, Roger claimed he was in the area for hunting, but a search of his car found no hunting gear. Further investigation revealed that Roger had a criminal record involving children, including an assault near the location where Angie's body was found. These crimes occurred before Angie's death, but the police had not thoroughly investigated Roger at the time. The new detective team called Roger in for questioning. He denied any involvement in Angie's murder, claiming he was in the area by chance. Roger stated that he was still at work when Angie's body was left at the crime scene. The investigation stalled after a 9-hour interrogation of Roger failed to yield results. Although his fingerprints were taken and compared to those on the tape from Angie's head, no match was found, leading to his release due to insufficient evidence. The case remained stagnant until 2018 when the St. Louis Police Department established a dedicated task force to re-examine the evidence using advanced technology. The team focused on 3 crucial pieces of evidence: the handcuffs, the tape from Angie's head, and the underwear used to silence her. Despite previous failed attempts to find the perpetrator's DNA on these items, the detectives were determined to try again. They began by re-examining the handcuffs but encountered difficulties due to the presence of Angie's blood. They then turned their attention to the tape from Angie's head but discovered it had deteriorated over time, meaningless their efforts. The investigators examined the underwear as a last resort, despite low expectations due to it being in Angie's mouth for several hours, which could have erased any foreign DNA. Using advanced technology, they thoroughly inspected every inch of the underwear and eventually found a tiny sample of unfamiliar DNA, sufficient for analysis. The DNA was confirmed to belong to a male and was immediately uploaded to the FBI database. In cases like this, it's common for the DNA not to match anyone in the database, requiring further efforts to identify the person. However, in this instance, the detectives got lucky. As soon as the DNA sample was uploaded, they received a match. The DNA belonged to 58-year-old Earl Cox, who had been in prison since 2003. Cox was not on police radar in connection with Angie's case, but he had a significant criminal record. His first stint in prison was in 1982, during his military service in Germany, where he worked as a part-time babysitter. However, his babysitting job ended when 4 girls accused him of sexual assault. Cox initially received an 8-year prison sentence in the United States but was released after serving only 3 years. Following his release, he relocated to St. Louis. However, his freedom was short-lived as he was arrested again 4 years later when 2 7-year-old girls accused him of sexual assault. Although the charges were eventually dropped due to lack of evidence, but he violated his parole, resulting in an additional year in prison. After his release in 1992, Cox moved to St. Louis to live with his relatives. The following year, he allegedly abducted and murdered Angie. In 2002, Cox was arrested again, this time for operating a major online platform where users shared child abuse materials. The FBI had been investigating the platform and caught Cox in a sting operation when he attempted to meet an undercover agent posing as a 14-year-old girl. Cox had planned to make the girl his slave and had sent her money for a bus ticket. However, when he arrived at the meeting place, He was met by armed FBI agents and arrested. A search of his computer revealed over 45,000 images of child abuse, as well as evidence that he was the mastermind behind the online platform. This led to the arrest of 60 more individuals associated with the site, marking one of the largest operations against pedophiles in the country. In 2003, Cox was sentenced to 10 years in prison. However, when his term ended, a judge used a legal loophole to keep him detained, citing him as a serious threat to children. He remained in prison until 2019, when his DNA sample matched the DNA sample from Angie's case. Detectives visited Cox in prison to discuss the match, but he denied any involvement and requested a lawyer. Given the strong DNA evidence against him, the police knew Cox's chances of winning in court were slim. Instead of pursuing a trial, investigators contacted Earl's lawyer with a proposal. In exchange for Cox's confession to Angie's murder, the prosecution would drop the death penalty and seek a life sentence instead. Aware of the strong evidence against him, Cox agreed to the deal. Detectives returned to the prison to hear Cox's account of the events. Although some parts of his story seemed unlikely, the crucial aspect for investigators was his admission to the murder. Cox claimed that on November 18, 1993, he was driving near his mother's and sister's neighborhood when his car broke down in the middle of the road. When he tried to examine the car, a school bus stopped, and several children got off. The children went into their homes, except for one girl, Angie. According to Cox, Angie approached him, and they briefly talked. He noticed she was cold, so he offered her a ride in his car, which she allegedly accepted. Cox then took Angie to Burger King to eat and later brought her to his home, where he claimed to have sexually assaulted her over several days. Eventually, Cox decided to get rid of Angie, taking her to the location where her body would later be found. He tied her to a tree, claiming she was still alive at that moment. Detectives were skeptical about certain parts of Cox's story. Angie was unlikely to get into a car with a stranger, given the short distance to her home. The investigators also questioned the car breakdown in Cox's story. He claimed the car stalled, but it started again when Angie approached. It's more likely that the perpetrator targeted Angie and decided to abduct her. This hypothesis seems more plausible than Cox's account. The detectives got what they needed, a confession to the murder. In August 2020, Cox was sentenced to life in prison without parole. A judge handed down the sentence. Unfortunately, Angie's mother didn't live to see justice served. She died of cancer in 2016. Angie's father, Ronald, told reporters that Cox was responsible for his wife's death and should have been tried for 2 murders. A woman's life was forever changed after the loss of her daughter. She lost all interest in life and eventually passed away. Cox's story, however, took a different turn. The prosecutor reopened a case involving the sexual abuse of 2 7-year-old girls, for which Cox had previously received a lenient sentence of 1 year in prison for violating his parole. The police reached out to one of Cox's victims, now an adult, and asked her to testify against him. Cox ultimately admitted to his crimes and was given an additional 10 years prison sentence. In court, his victim spoke out, saying that despite Cox's terrible actions, but she would go on to live a happy and fulfilling life, while Cox would spend the rest of his life in prison. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Gretchen Harrington. Gretchen Harrington was born on June 13, 1967, in Pennsylvania. She was the youngest of 3 sisters, and her family moved to the small town of Brawl shortly after her birth. Gretchen's father, a pastor, took a job at the local church, and Gretchen quickly grew to love the town. She spent much of her free time outdoors with her sisters and friends. Brawl was a safe community where parents felt comfortable letting their children play outside until dark. As a member of a devoutly religious family, Gretchen spent much time at her father's church and excelled in Sunday school, always getting top grades. On August 15, 1975, Gretchen's family was eagerly awaiting the return of her mother and newborn sister from the hospital. Gretchen wanted to be home to greet them, but her father encouraged her to attend Sunday school to keep up her grades. Gretchen reluctantly agreed to go to church and set off with her Bible. Her older sisters, who usually walked with her, stayed home that morning. However, Gretchen wasn't worried about the short 8-minute walk to church. Sunday school is divided into 2 sessions. The first session takes place at Trinity Church and lasts an hour and a half. After that, some of the children go to Father Gretchen's church. But when the children arrived at the second church at 11:30 a.m., Gretchen's father noticed that his daughter was not there. He assumed she might be at the first church, so he called to check. The pastor's wife answered, informing him that Gretchen was not there. She then told her husband, David, who was a Sunday school teacher. He was surprised by the news, since Gretchen had not attended his class that morning. Gretchen's father became worried when he couldn't find her. He asked David to contact the police and started searching the area between the churches and nearby streets, but she was nowhere to be found. He also reached out to the parents of her friends. But they were either at church or home. Her best friend, who was also David's daughter, hadn't seen her all day. As news of Gretchen's disappearance spread, the police quickly launched a search operation. Hundreds of volunteers joined in, many of whom knew Gretchen's father from his church. Together, they searched the entire town, then moved on to wooded areas and the riverbank. A police helicopter was also deployed to scan the area from above. The search continued through the night, but to no avail. The next day, more volunteers joined in. Police posted flyers with Gretchen's photo and information about her disappearance along the roads. Despite their efforts, police were unable to find Gretchen. After several days of searching, no significant clues were found and Gretchen's fate remains a mystery. The town is known for its safe environment, where children are often allowed to play outside freely without adult supervision from a young age. However, this sense of security is no longer there when Gretchen goes missing. Some people thought she might have run away from home, while others believed she had gone swimming in the river and drowned. However, the most alarming theory was that she had been abducted by someone. As a result, parents became extremely cautious and stopped letting their children go out alone. Police interviewed bystanders. They gathered some clues. One witness reported seeing a girl who looked like Gretchen near the church on the morning she went missing. According to the witness, a green sedan approached the girl, but the witness did not see what happened next. Another person shared a similar story, but this time described a white Cadillac approaching the girl. Police checked the owners of cars matching the description in the area. 4 days later, detectives received a new lead. A resident of Westchester, a town 30 minutes from Brawl, contacted police and reported finding children's shorts matching the description of Gretchen's clothing. Police immediately showed Gretchen's mother the shorts. But she confirmed that they did not belong to her daughter. The investigation into Gretchen's disappearance had stalled, with no progress made for several weeks. As a result, the police halted their search operation and shifted their focus to gathering more information. They continued to interview witnesses, but with each passing day, their hopes of finding Gretchen alive began to dwindle. Until October 14th, when police received a phone call. A jogger was running in a large national park, about 20 minutes from Brawl, when he stumbled upon a body. The jogger immediately alerted park rangers, who then notified the police. Upon arriving at the scene, police quickly determined that the body was that of a child. However, due to the severe state of decomposition, identification of the child was extremely difficult. Police suspected that Gretchen might be the victim, so they showed her parents the clothes found on her body. Gretchen's mother quickly identified them as her daughters because she had sewn them herself. Forensic experts later confirmed that the body was Gretchen's by comparing them to her dental records. They also determined that she had died from severe head trauma. Because the body was so badly decomposed, police were unable to gather further information, including whether Gretchen had been sexually assaulted. Additionally, DNA analysis was not available in 1975, leaving police without any further leads. News of the murder sparked renewed interest in the case, and police received numerous tips from the community. The investigation into Gretchen's death turned up no leads. Police screened nearby residents with a history of violent crime, but nothing came up. Months later, the case had made no progress. Over the years, the case was reopened periodically, and the police reviewed the available information. However, each time, the investigation yielded no new evidence. Even applying DNA analysis was of no help in this case, as no foreign DNA was found on Gretchen's body or clothing. The case of Gretchen's murder went unsolved for decades, occasionally resurfacing in newspapers and on television. However, it wasn't until recent years that the case regained widespread public attention. Two local journalists, Joanna and Mike, decided to write a book about the crime, dedicating several years to gathering information. As children, both Joanna and Mike grew up in the same town as Gretchen. Joanna, who was only 9 years old when the crime occurred, the town had changed forever, and children were no longer allowed to roam freely. Leave home unsupervised. This fear lasted for years, leaving a lasting impression on the townspeople, the memory of Gretchen's murder still fresh in their minds. To write their book, Joanna and Mike had access to the case files and interviewed individuals involved in the investigation. By carefully piecing together the events surrounding Gretchen's disappearance, they were able to reconstruct the entire story. The book, released in 2022, brought attention to Gretchen's case. Months later, a woman contacted police about Gretchen. The woman said she was 10 years old at the time of the murder and lived in Havertone, near Gretchen's home. She was friends with Gretchen and her sisters, as well as many other kids in the area. She often slept over at friends' houses, and one night, while she was at her sister's house, she woke up in the middle of the night feeling someone touching her. When she opened her eyes, she saw their father standing in front of her, who quickly left. The next day, she stayed another night. Her friend's dad continued to come into her bedroom and started touching her. The next morning, she finally told one of her sisters about what happened to her. She was surprised that it happened quite often with her friends. When the woman returned home, she shared her entire story with her parents. However, instead of going to the authorities, they banned her from ever going to her friend's house again. This was just a week before Gretchen went missing. The woman eventually revealed the identity of the man involved in her story, David Zanstra, the same pastor who taught at Sunday school. She also shared that a month after Gretchen went missing, one of her friends told her about the incident, that a man had tried to kidnap her. The girl refused to get into his car and later confided to her friends that the real culprit was David Zanstra. The woman provided her personal diary as evidence of the information provided. In her diary entry on September 15, 1975, she documented her friend's request to keep the encounter secret due to fears of potential harm from David Zanstra. Upon receiving this new information, the police immediately reopened the investigation into Gretchen's disappearance. While reviewing the case files, detectives discovered several suspicious factors that indirectly implicated David Zanstra. It was David Zanstra who reported Gretchen missing to the police, providing investigators with a detailed description of her clothing: dark blue zip-up shorts with front buttons and pockets without zippers or buttons, and a white shirt with braided hair. However, he mentioned that he had not seen Gretchen that day, raising questions about how he knew what she was wearing. His description was later confirmed by the discovery of her body, dressed exactly as he had described. Police closely examined David, the man who taught Sunday school at Gretchen's father's church. David initially claimed he had not seen Gretchen on the morning of her disappearance. However, David's alibi gave him enough time to kidnap Gretchen, kill her, dump her body in the park, and return to the church to teach. The investigation revealed that David and his family had moved to another state just months after Gretchen went missing. This sudden move, combined with David's ownership of a green scooter, attracted the attention of the police. The police decided to question David, who was now 83 years old and living in Georgia. On July 17, 2023, they began questioning David. As the conversation progressed, David realized that the police suspected him of murder. In response, he denied all accusations and asked what evidence they had against him. David was confronted with incriminating evidence, including a woman's testimony about his inappropriate behavior at a sleepover and allegations of molesting his own daughter. When he learned that his secret had been exposed, David's demeanor changed. After 48 years of silence, he finally began to talk about the murder. According to David, on the morning of the murder, he drove his green American motor station wagon to the church where Gretchen's father was the pastor. He saw Gretchen leave the house and waited until no one was around before approaching her. He offered her a ride, and she agreed. However, instead of taking Gretchen to the church, David drove her to a secluded park area. He stopped the car and instructed her to undress, but Gretchen refused and asked to go home. In response, David struck her several times on the head, causing her to lose consciousness. He then removed her clothes and committed the crime before driving her to another park. He carried her body into the bushes and concealed it with branches. David then returned to the church to begin his classes. When David confessed to the crime, the police arrested him for Gretchen's murder. David went to Pennsylvania, where he was held pending trial. David's work held a respectable position in society, which protected him from suspicion. However, after the truth finally came to light, the police obtained a DNA sample and began comparing it with DNA from other unsolved cases. They also investigated the disappearances of young girls in the cities where he worked. Police have linked David to the disappearance of 4-year-old Amanda Campbell from California, who went missing in 1991. The case resembles Gretchen's. At the time, David Zanstra was a pastor in that same neighborhood. The police currently have no concrete evidence against David, but they have found similarities between the various cases and Gretchen's kidnapping. Therefore, they are investigating David as the possible perpetrator of the cases. The trial for Gretchen's murder has not yet begun. David's attorney is trying to delay the process and advise him to withdraw his confession. If this happens, the trial could drag on for years, and given his advanced age, David may not live to see the verdict. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Kelly Dwyer. Kelly Dwyer was born in 1986 in Lincolnshire, a suburb of Chicago. Her parents divorced when she was 16, but they remained close to her. The divorce had a significant impact on Kelly's life. A year after her parents' divorce, Kelly graduated from high school without a clear plan for her future. To delay her decision to go to college, she worked part-time at a local restaurant. 6 years later, in 2008, Kelly, then 22, moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to start afresh. She enrolled in college, became a yoga instructor, and found a job as a saleswoman to cover her living expenses. She also worked as a nanny to earn extra income. Kelly often visited trendy places around town, creating memorable experiences. When she met her father a month ago, she was living in Milwaukee, and her life was going well. At that time, Kelly was a successful yoga instructor and a popular employee at a sports store. Kelly seemed content with her life, enjoying her job and a year-long relationship with Chris Zacco, a 38-year-old IT manager for a transportation company. Chris had graduated from Boston University in 2009 with a degree in international business and had moved from New York City to Milwaukee for work. He was a hardworking, decent man from a good family who shared Kelly's interests in sports and entertainment. Kelly and Chris seemed to get along well. Chris had built a successful career, owned a luxury apartment, an expensive car, and a large fortune that he had earned himself. Kelly's father approved of him, seeing him as a great match for his daughter. On October 12, 2013, Kelly was nowhere to be seen at work. She was well liked for her punctuality and work ethic, so this struck everyone as odd. Her colleagues tried to contact her, but her cell phone was silent. She was also inactive on social media. Kelly had never left her phone behind before. She simply disappeared, and her loved ones contacted the police to file a missing persons report. However, during the investigation into Kelly's disappearance, detectives found no evidence of enemies or individuals who might want to harm her. All of her belongings were still at home, so police ruled out the possibility that she left voluntarily. What was concerning was that her bank account, phone, and other accounts had no activity. Police suspected that Kelly was in trouble. Since Chris was the last person to see her on October 10, 2013, investigators brought him in for questioning. Chris stated that he and Kelly spent time at his apartment in Lafayette Towers, then went to a nearby bar, socialized, and drank. They returned to his apartment around 2:30 a.m., had a good time, and went to bed. At 9 a.m., Kelly left Chris's apartment, and they never saw each other again. Chris insisted that Kelly was not his girlfriend, saying they had an open relationship. He also revealed that he was in love with someone else and had plans for a future with her. This raised suspicions among investigators, who found Chris's story plausible but noted inconsistencies in his words and actions. To investigate further, detectives interviewed friends who had been with Kelly and Chris the night before Kelly went missing. These friends confirmed that the group had a good time at a bar and then ordered pizza, eating it on a bench outside. Kelly seemed to be in a good mood, sharing her plans for the next day, which included sleeping in, doing yoga, doing laundry, and relaxing. Chris and Kelly left for his apartment that night, where they met another friend who had been invited over for drinks. This friend reported feeling uncomfortable in Chris's apartment because she sensed tension between Chris and Kelly. She recalled that Chris was smoking and chatting with her while Kelly seemed upset. Assuming that Kelly was just tired, the friend thought little of it and left the apartment. However, after talking to Kelly's other friends, investigators discovered that Chris and Kelly were not on good terms. Kelly loves Chris very much. But unfortunately, Chris seems uninterested in their relationship. Chris does not make any long-term plans involving Kelly, which worries her. Kelly's friend, missing, suspects that Chris is being unfaithful and that their relationship will not last. As a result, Kelly loses hope for a future with Chris and begins to look for other options. She creates a profile on a dating website and starts chatting with various men, but she has yet to meet any of them in real life. Kelly's intention is to have a backup plan in case things do not work out with Chris. Additionally, her friends notice bruises on Kelly's arms and neck and ask her about them, but Kelly dismisses their concerns by downplaying the situation. Her friends suspect that the bruises may be a sign of domestic violence, but Kelly never confirms their suspicions. Meanwhile, investigators analyzed security footage from Chris's home. The footage showed Kelly and Chris coming home drunk one night, but Kelly was never seen leaving the apartment. This contradicted Chris's testimony that Kelly left his home at 9 a.m. the next morning. It was later discovered that another friend of Chris's was at the apartment that night and admitted to using illegal drugs with Chris. Detectives obtained a search warrant for Chris's apartment and found numerous drugs, pills, pipes, and other paraphernalia, leading to Chris's arrest for possession. They also discovered a torn shower curtain that appeared to have been forcefully removed. During questioning, Chris remained calm and admitted to using drugs but denied distributing them. A search of his cell phone revealed disturbing content, including photos of an unconscious girl in bed and a video of Chris raping the girl, who appeared to have been strangled. This led to suspicions that Chris had drugged and exploited her. Evidence from Chris's phone was linked to Kelly's disappearance. Police returned to Chris's apartment with a dog, which responded to the bed and bathroom area before leading them to the front door. The dog then guided police to Chris's car in the parking lot and to a nearby dumpster. The investigation reached a critical stage when investigators believed Kelly had been murdered. Kelly's boyfriend, Chris, became the prime suspect, as evidence suggested he was the last person to see her alive. It is believed that he spent time with Kelly in his apartment before secretly moving her body into his car, a plan that would have escaped the building's 28 surveillance cameras. During the investigation, police analyzed Chris's computer and discovered child pornography. This led to Chris being charged with possession of the images, but he was released on bail and is awaiting trial. The investigation continues as authorities attempt to find Kelly's body and gather enough evidence to build a stronger case against Chris. It should be noted that Chris had claimed to be in a long-term relationship with a woman, and investigators quickly began gathering information about that woman. The investigation uncovered the identity of a woman named Megan, with whom Chris had been secretly in a 3-year relationship, unbeknownst to Kelly, similar to the relationship he had with Kelly. Police came to interview Megan and showed her photos of Chris' apartment. After a thorough inspection, Megan found several items missing, including a shower curtain in the bathroom, a rug, several towels, and the large golf bag that was usually kept in the bedroom. Detectives believe Kelly could fit in the large bag Megan reported missing. After examining the building's entrances and exits, police found a side path that Chris could have taken to get to his car without being seen by surveillance cameras. Reviewing footage from the parking lot cameras, Chris was seen arriving at the house with the large bag, which he placed in the trunk of his car. At 10:06 a.m. on October 11th, Chris left the house in his car. Just 2 minutes later, at 10:08 a.m., Kelly's phone lost connection at the same location. Over the next 8 hours, footage captured Chris making multiple trips between his home and his car, loading up on belongings, before leaving for good at 6:16 p.m. Chris did not return home until the next day. When investigators asked him what he had been doing the previous day, he said he was moving his summer sports gear to his mother's house. However, no one found this explanation credible. Chris was supposed to meet Megan at 7:30 that evening, but he arrived more than an hour late. Detectives suspected that he was looking for a place to dispose of Kelly's body, which would explain his delay. Unfortunately, they were unable to track his movements because his phone had been turned off since the morning. As an IT expert, Chris would have known that his phone records could be used to track him. Megan reported that Chris seemed very strange that night. He appeared restless and anxious, and he said that his phone was not working, which was why he was late. After the date, Megan and Chris went to Megan's apartment, where they spent the night. According to Megan, Chris was extremely stressed, had not slept at all, and was sweating so much that she had to change the sheets in the morning. Investigators believe that Chris was worried because he still had Kelly's body in the trunk of his car and was afraid of being discovered. He was trying to find a place to hide her body. On the morning of October 12th, Chris said goodbye to Megan and left after trying to convince her to temporarily move to Denver, but she refused. Police tracked Chris's location history using his car's GPS, which led them to a cheese shop called Cheese House, 80 miles from Milwaukee. However, it seemed unlikely that Chris would have driven that far just to buy cheese. Chris claimed that he had bought cheese for his parents, presenting a receipt for the cheese at 9:55 a.m. on October 12th, which his parents confirmed. However, the police found it difficult to believe Chris's story, as the same cheese could easily be purchased at a nearby supermarket. They suspected that Chris might have dumped Kelly's body in the area around the cheese store. Further investigation revealed that on his way back, Chris stopped at a sports store and bought new sneakers that afternoon. Detectives suspected that Chris had deliberately discarded his old shoes, possibly to avoid leaving blood or footprints that could be linked to the crime scene. It appeared that he had carefully planned to destroy evidence and create an alibi for himself. Chris, with his analytical mind, had tried to commit the perfect crime. However, investigators were able to spot inconsistencies in his story. Notably, it took him over 2 hours to travel from the cheese house to the sports store, a distance of about 80 kilometers, when it would normally take only an hour. This significant time difference suggests that Chris spent an additional hour on another activity, possibly hiding the body. Police speculate that he may have dumped the body along the way. However, the exact location of the body remains unknown. With a large search area spanning 50 miles, finding the body proved to be a huge challenge. A roadside search eventually led to a discovery. In a wooded area approximately 37 miles from the city, a local resident found human remains while walking. Upon discovery, the resident immediately contacted the sheriff's office. Dental records confirmed the remains were those of Kelly Dwyer. This discovery finally ended Kelly's parents' long and agonizing search for their daughter. The next step was to secure justice by determining the exact cause of her death. Based on available information, the medical examiner believed she may have been strangled but not forcefully enough to fracture the hyoid bone. There was no direct evidence at the scene where Kelly's body was discovered, such as torn curtains, mats, towels, or bags. However, the position of the skeleton provided valuable insight. The body was found face down, with one arm trapped underneath and the legs bent in a way that suggested it had been hidden for some time after death. This finding further supported the theory that Kelly's body had been hidden in a golf bag. As evidenced by footage of Chris holding the bag and driving into the area where the body was discovered. While these findings were compelling, they were circumstantial and did not directly implicate Chris in Kelly's murder. Ultimately, it took 5 years for Chris to be formally charged in connection with Kelly's disappearance. The charges against him were manslaughter and concealment of a body, as investigators lacked specific evidence to prove intent. Theorizing about the events of that night, detectives speculated that Chris and Kelly had become intimate, but Chris got carried away with strangulation, leading to Kelly's death. The investigation revealed that Chris then ripped off the shower curtain, removed the rug and towels, wrapped Kelly's body, placed it in a bag, thoroughly cleaned the house, and disposed of it. Throughout the ordeal, Chris maintained his innocence in Kelly's murder. Key evidence was presented at Chris's trial, including CCTV footage, cell phone video of the strangulation, and the search of his apartment by a dog. Megan, who testified against Chris, reported that he was extremely anxious on the day of the incident and was late for a meeting. Additionally, Chris's former girlfriends took the stand, expressing their concerns about his unhealthy obsession with strangulation and rough sex, which had frightened them. The defense countered that there was no direct evidence linking Chris to the crime and that the prosecution's case was based on speculation and conjecture. Chris had a clean record before the drug possession incident and was a successful IT professional with a stable job. The defense argued that Chris was incapable of murder. However, it was discovered that not all the CCTV footage had been saved, casting doubt on the prosecution's conclusion that Kelly had not left Chris's house. The defense presented a witness who claimed to have seen a girl resembling Kelly in another man's car the weekend after she went missing. Although the witness had previously seen Kelly on TV as a missing person, he was not 100% sure it was her. The defense offered an alternative explanation for Kelly's disappearance, suggesting that she may have left Chris's apartment safely but was later caught by one of her new boyfriends. The defense also questioned the reliability of the police dog during the investigation. Since the dog's reaction was not captured on video, its alert was based solely on the police officer's subjective interpretation. In response, the prosecution argued that the investigation using the sniffer dog was conducted objectively and transparently, with multiple police officers present and agreeing on the results. Ultimately, the prosecution convinced the jury that Chris was responsible for the murder. With no other obvious suspects, the prosecution argued that Chris had planned and executed the crime carefully, deliberately destroying evidence to cover his tracks. After lengthy deliberations, the jury found Chris guilty of first-degree manslaughter and concealing a body. The Kelly family and the prosecution had asked for the maximum sentence of 48 years, while the defense asked for a reduced sentence of 22 years. In December 2018, Chris Sacco, then 43, was sentenced to 31 years in prison, including 26 years for manslaughter and 5 years for concealing a body. In addition, Chris Sacco was sentenced to 19 years for possession of child pornography and possession of narcotics, based on the outcome of his November 2014 trial. Chris Sacco is currently serving his sentence at the Green Bay Correctional Facility in Wisconsin. He will be eligible for parole in 2065, when he turns 93, essentially making his sentence a life sentence. Chris Sacco was unhappy with the sentence and attempted to appeal, but his appeal was rejected. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Kirsten Hatfield. Kirsten Hatfield was born on February 12, 1989, in Midwest City, Oklahoma. Shortly after her birth, Kirsten's father left the family. As a result, Kirsten and her mother, Shannon, moved in with her grandparents, who helped Shannon take care of her. When Kirsten was 2 years old, she and Shannon moved into their own home. Later, Shannon remarried and had a second daughter named Faith. However, this marriage did not last long and ended, leaving Shannon to care for her 2 daughters alone. Despite her young age, Kirsten had to help her mother take care of her younger sister. This responsibility helped Kirsten become more independent and closer to Faith. Kirsten and Faith often slept in the same room, while their mother slept in the next room. On the evening of May 13, 1997, Shannon was getting her children ready for bed. Shannon usually read bedtime stories to her daughters, but since Faith was already asleep, she didn't want to wake her. Instead, Shannon simply said goodnight to Kirsten and went to her bedroom, leaving the girls' door slightly open. She did this every night in case the girls woke up and needed her. At around 3 a.m., Shannon awoke to a noise coming from her daughter's room. Believing her daughters were awake, she went to check on them. However, by the time she reached the bedroom door, the noise had stopped. Assuming the girls had fallen back asleep, she decided not to disturb them. But before she returned to her room, she noticed something strange. The girls' door was completely closed, even though she usually left it slightly open. She wondered if Kirsten or Faith might have closed the door, or if she had forgotten to leave it open. Shannon approached the door, opened it slightly, but did not go in, then returned to sleep. The next morning, around 6:30 a.m., Shannon went to wake her children. Upon entering the bedroom, she found only her youngest daughter, Faith, lying in bed. She woke Faith and asked about Kirsten, but Faith did not know. Shannon searched the house but could not find Kirsten. She looked outside and contacted all her friends whose children were friends with Kirsten, hoping she had gone to visit one of them. However, they all said they had not seen Kirsten. Shannon then called her father, who lived nearby, hoping Kirsten might have come to see him. But he had not seen Kirsten either. Realizing Kirsten had disappeared, Shannon called 911 and the police arrived immediately. Initially, they thought Kirsten might be hiding somewhere in the house or wandering around the town. However, as they began to investigate, it became clear that the situation was more serious. When they checked Kirsten's room, the police found the window slightly open with a few drops of blood on the window frame. Further investigation around the window led them to discover a bloody piece of children's underwear a few feet away. The police asked Shannon to identify the underwear, and she confirmed that it belonged to Kirsten. The investigators realized they might be dealing with a kidnapping and immediately called for additional police support. While searching the area around the house, the police also questioned Shannon. She recounted waking up at 3 a.m. after hearing a noise. It became apparent that an unknown criminal might have kidnapped Kirsten at that time. The police began questioning all the neighborhood residents. However, no one saw or heard anything suspicious that night. The only clue was a neighbor who had been awakened by a dog barking around 3 a.m., coinciding with the time of the kidnapping. With no clear leads, investigators called in a child psychologist to speak with Faith. Despite being only 3 years old, she told them she had witnessed her sister's kidnapping. However, she only said one short sentence: "A bad guy came and took my sister away." This confirmed that Kirsten had not left the house voluntarily, but it still did not provide any specific information about the perpetrator or Kirsten's whereabouts. Detectives were forced to restart the investigation from scratch. They suspected that the kidnapper might be someone Kirsten knew, as there was no sign of a stranger being able to enter Kirsten's room without making a sound. While investigating this hypothesis, the police discovered that Kirsten's mother had a history of drug problems. From there, they began to consider the possibility that the kidnapping was related to this. There were two main theories. First, Kirsten's mother may have owed money to someone in the criminal world, and they decided to capture Kirsten to collect the debt. Second, the police did not rule out the possibility that the mother voluntarily handed Kirsten over to the kidnapper. If the second hypothesis were true, it would explain why the kidnapping was carried out quietly. The police questioned Shannon, but she denied any involvement in the case. She claimed that she had long been drug-free and would never do anything dangerous to her daughter. Although the detectives did not rule out her involvement, they did not find any concrete evidence. Therefore, they decided to seek the public's help through the media, asking people to share any information related to the case. After the media announcement, the police department received hundreds of calls. The detectives followed up on each lead, but most did not yield any useful information. However, they did discover some disturbing clues. A woman called the police, suspecting her boyfriend of being involved in Kirsten Hatfield's kidnapping. He had been acting aggressively and had threatened the woman. When police investigated the man, they discovered some alarming information. He was known to Shannon's brother, which meant that Kirsten may have known him. Furthermore, the house that Kirsten and her mother shared previously belonged to Shannon's brother, leading investigators to believe that the suspect may have been familiar with the layout of the house. The man also had a history of drug and assault charges, which led police to suspect that he may have been involved in the case. The man claimed he had been at a bar the night of the incident. After verifying the information, police found multiple witnesses who confirmed he was at the bar until approximately 4 a.m. This ruled out the possibility that he had kidnapped Kirsten. Investigators then pursued hundreds of other leads, but none led to any results. The case dragged on for months, and the hope of finding Kirsten alive diminished as time went on. Kirsten's mother, Shannon, could not simply sit around and do nothing. From the very beginning, she made every effort to find her daughter. She gave interviews to local media, distributed flyers about Kirsten, and even investigated suspects herself. However, Shannon faced many challenges in her quest to find the truth. For example, she contacted local businesses to ask them to distribute flyers about Kirsten in their offices, stores, and facilities. Many businesses refused, saying it was not in line with company policy. Shannon tried to arrange a meeting with the state governor but was unsuccessful. She also set up a small center to attract volunteers to help with Kirsten's case. The center focused on distributing flyers and communicating with the media. However, Shannon encountered some difficult problems, including volunteers stealing money and using the media to gain attention. Nevertheless, she persisted and did not give up in her search for the truth. After years of trying, Shannon realized that her current approach was not working. So she decided to change direction. She enrolled in college, earned a degree in criminology, and became a probation officer. Her goal was not only to find her daughter's kidnapper but also to protect the community from criminals who could pose a threat. She believed that Kirsten's kidnapper may have had other criminal records and wanted to prevent them from committing further crimes. While investigating her daughter's disappearance, Shannon delved into the history of violence in the town and surrounding areas to find any connection to the abduction. However, all her efforts yielded no positive results. Shannon was faced with the fact that Kirsten might not be alive anymore and that she might never be able to bring her back. Despite this, she never gave up on finding answers. The police reopened the case several times to look into new leads, but to no avail. They worked with the FBI to create a physical sketch of Kirsten years after the abduction. However, no one thought Kirsten was still alive, but without any remains, they could not confirm this with certainty. The case seemed to have stalled for years until a major breakthrough in 2014. A woman contacted the police with a strange story. While sorting through her grandmother's inheritance, the woman found a diary. The diary revealed that the woman's son had confessed to killing Kirsten Hatfield. The story contained enough detail that detectives were convinced it was true. According to the diary, the man kidnapped Kirsten from her bedroom and took her to a house he owned in a nearby town. There, he brutally abused Kirsten and murdered her. The process was recorded in many pages of the diary, which sent shivers down the spines of even experienced investigators. The diary also revealed that the entire incident was videotaped. When the police questioned the woman's son, they expected him to deny any involvement in the crime. However, his words surprised them. He claimed to have no involvement in the crime but knew who the killer was because Kirsten had been murdered in his ex-girlfriend's house. This left the police baffled, and they had to ask him for the address of the house. Detectives quickly obtained a warrant and sent a team to thoroughly inspect the house. They began by spraying luminol, a substance that glows when it comes into contact with the smallest traces of blood, even if the blood has been wiped from the crime scene. When the forensic experts did this, they were shocked. One of them later said that the entire house lit up like a Christmas tree. The experts discovered traces of blood everywhere in the house, and especially that the blood stains matched the description of the murder in the diary. To gather more evidence, they removed the floorboards, cut up the wallpaper, and sent it all to the lab. They also excavated the property to search for the victim's remains. The police also found a box containing hundreds of videotapes in the house, which reminded them of the diary. They suspected that one of the tapes might contain footage of the victim's abuse. Detectives examined each tape carefully but found no evidence of the murder. Excavations on the property were also fruitless. No remains or other evidence were found. However, the police still believed they had discovered the truth behind Kirsten's disappearance. The case was solved, but the pain and suffering of Kirsten's family will never be completely healed. Detectives faced an unexpected turn when analyzing the blood stains left in Kirsten's home. The results showed that the blood was not human but that of an animal. This shocked the police because they thought they were close to solving the case. Instead, they were faced with another false clue. It is unclear exactly what the clue was, but it is possible that someone played a prank on the police or that the diary was written by a mentally ill person who saw the kidnapping on the news and believed that a story would spring to mind. However, the detectives continued to hope to uncover the truth. But no new clues emerged and the case went cold again. In the summer of 2015, the case was handed over to Detective Daryl Miller. He decided to start a new investigation and studied all the existing documents and records. During this process, he discovered something strange. Daryl found that his predecessors had overlooked key evidence: blood stains on the windowsill in Kirsten's room and on her underwear. This evidence had been in storage for a long time for unknown reasons. The police apparently did not think that analyzing it would yield any useful results, as they believed the blood might belong to the victim. However, Daryl decided to send the evidence to the lab for analysis. And it yielded a big surprise. The lab results showed that neither of the blood samples belonged to Kirsten, but instead to an unknown man. This was a major breakthrough in the case, but also posed a new challenge for Daryl. The kidnapper's DNA sample had been uploaded to the FBI database, but there were no matches. This could mean that the kidnapper had not committed any serious crimes in the past, or that the crime had occurred before the database was created. Daryl decided to collect DNA samples from all the men involved in the case since the kidnapping. The police made a list, located each person, and sent their DNA to the lab. Surprisingly, each individual was willing to provide a DNA sample immediately. This led investigators to suspect that the killer might not be on the list of suspects. Daryl waited patiently for the results, and eventually, he received a call from the lab. Experts analyzed a sample and found that it was an exact match to the blood on the windowsill and on the victim's underwear. This person was Anthony Palma, a 56-year-old neighbor of the Hatfield family. Anthony was one of the first people the police spoke to after the kidnapping. At the time, he said he had been awakened at 3 a.m. by the sound of a dog barking. Now, after confirming his involvement, detectives decided to question him again. Although the DNA evidence was sufficient to convict him, investigators still wanted him to confess. This would expedite the trial and help them find Kirsten's remains. Since he was the only one who knew where the remains were, locating them would be difficult without his cooperation. The detectives took a cautious approach. They brought Anthony in for questioning, saying it was merely a formality to gather new information. In fact, they wanted him to admit whether he had ever been to the Hatfields' house. When asked if he remembered anything else from that night, Anthony told the same story he had told 18 years earlier, but this time he added a new detail. He said he had seen a white car parked in front of Kirsten's house. But he didn't pay much attention to it. Next, the police wanted to know more about his relationship with Kirsten and her family. Anthony explained that although he lived next door, he had never spoken to Kirsten directly. He stated he was close to other kids in the neighborhood and that they would occasionally come by for candy or help repairing their bikes. The police then continued to question Anthony, asking if he had ever been to Kirsten's house, whether to help the family or just to chat. But Anthony insisted that he had never been to her house. This statement raised suspicion among the police. While investigating the crime scene, they had discovered his blood on the windowsill of Kirsten's room. By checking his previous statements, the police realized that Anthony had lied. However, there was one important problem: the house where Kirsten had lived belonged to Anthony's friend, and he admitted to having visited the house in the past. However, the blood on the windowsill was very fresh and could not have been there many years before the murder. The detective decided to present the critical information and informed him that his blood had been found in Kirsten's room and on her underwear. Anthony completely denied this and repeated that he had never been in their home. The investigators tried to get him to confess, but he continued to deny it. The detective decided to change the method of questioning and left the room. Detective Daryl was asked to step in and talk to Anthony. Bringing a photo of Kirsten, the detective placed it on the table in front of the suspect. Anthony immediately pushed the photo away and tried to avoid looking at it for the rest of the conversation. Daryl asked Anthony a variety of questions, hoping that he would make a mistake and confess to the crime. However, Anthony continued to deny everything. Realizing that they would not be able to extract a confession, the police decided to end the interrogation and arrest him. They then obtained a search warrant for the house and excavated the surrounding area but found no trace of Kirsten's remains or any other evidence. During the trial, Anthony consistently denied his involvement. However, DNA analysis revealed the truth in court. Additional details emerged, showing that the police had overlooked some important information during the initial investigation. Anthony had a criminal record, including breaking into another girl's bedroom and assaulting her. He had also been incarcerated in the 1980s for an assault involving a weapon. This information further highlighted Anthony's dangerous criminal status. However, for some reason, his previous convictions were overturned in 1997. In late 2017, a jury found him guilty of kidnapping and murdering Kirsten, sentencing him to life in prison. Throughout the trial, he never revealed the location of Kirsten's remains, and the police doubted they would ever find her. The biggest problem in finding Kirsten's body was related to where Anthony was known to operate. As a park ranger, he was familiar with remote areas and might have chosen a hard-to-reach place to bury the body. Nevertheless, Kirsten's mother, Shannon, persisted in her search for her daughter. Shannon kept in touch with Anthony while he was in prison, hoping to find clues about Kirsten's whereabouts. During each meeting, Shannon felt Anthony was slowly revealing information, but he ultimately remained silent. In 2019, Anthony was killed by a fellow inmate over a personal grudge related to his crimes against a child, leaving Kirsten's family almost without hope of finding her body. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Autumn Taggart. In 2018, Autumn Taggart was a single mother living in Windsor, a city near the US-Canada border. She resided about a mile from the border that separates Michigan, USA, from Ontario, Canada, with her 9-year-old son, Gavin. On Saturday, June 9, 2018, Autumn, Gavin, and Chris Sherwin, Gavin's father and his Autumn's ex-husband, spent the afternoon together. Despite their breakup, Autumn and Chris had remained on friendly terms, prioritizing their co-parenting of Gavin to minimize the negative effects of their divorce. By the late afternoon, they went grocery shopping together. Afterward, Chris drove Autumn and Gavin to the building where they lived on the 3rd floor. After saying goodbye, Chris returned home. Before bed, Gavin played video games with his mother. He had no idea later that night would turn into a terrifying nightmare. Later that night, while it was still dark, Gavin woke up to a strange noise. He opened his eyes to find an unfamiliar man standing next to his bed. The stranger instructed Gavin to close his eyes and go back to sleep. Then he left Gavin's room. Gavin heard his mother scream a minute later, and the sound sent a chill down his spine, filling him with a sense of dread. A few minutes passed, and eerie silence filled the air. His mother's screams had stopped, and he eventually drifted off to sleep. In the morning, Gavin got out of bed and rushed to his mom's room. The room was in disarray, with everything smashed and destroyed. His mom, Autumn, was lying motionless on the bed. At first, Gavin thought his mother was just sleeping, but the blood on her nose made it clear something was seriously wrong. As the devastating truth set in, that his mom had passed away, it shocked him. Gavin didn't want to believe it was true. Desperate to escape the pain, Gavin spent the morning playing video games and watching YouTube, trying to distract himself from the truth. However, as the day wore on, the emotions became too much to bear. In the afternoon, Gavin broke down in tears and knew he had to tell someone what had happened. Gathering his courage, Gavin went back to his mom's room, grabbed her phone, and texted his dad, Chris, on Messenger. With shaking hands, he typed out a message, telling his dad that Autumn wouldn't wake up. As soon as Chris received the message, he and his girlfriend rushed to Gavin's house. After parking, Chris exited his car and saw his son standing behind a sliding glass door on the 3rd floor of the building. Since Chris didn't have an electronic key to enter, Gavin came downstairs to let him in. Chris then asked his son to stay with his girlfriend while he checked on Autumn, who was not waking up. Upon entering the apartment and bedroom, Chris found Autumn pale and bruised, with a bloody nose. He immediately called 911, and the police and ambulance responded to the scene. However, the paramedics declared Autumn dead due to the severity of her injuries and evidence of a struggle in the bedroom, ruling out the possibility of an accident. As investigators searched the apartment for evidence, a specialist interviewed Gavin to gather more information. The boy revealed that a stranger had entered their house and told him to go back to sleep. He reported hearing his mother's screams, which eventually stopped. Gavin also described the man he saw in his room, recalling that the man was of average height, white, and had disheveled hair, appearing as though he had just woken up. The boy's testimony described the suspect as skinny but not extremely so. A forensic examination after Autumn's death concluded she died from strangulation, with visible signs of a prior beating and genital injuries. Male DNA was also found on Autumn's body. The police investigated to answer 3 main questions: how did the perpetrator gain entry to the apartment, what was the motive behind the crime, and most crucially, the identity of the suspect. The police quickly ruled out the possibility that the killer was a tenant in the building. Since Gavin was familiar with all his neighbors, and the man he saw on the night of the crime was a stranger to him, this led them to look elsewhere for a suspect. To enter Autumn's apartment, the perpetrator needed more than just an electronic key to the building. However, there were no signs of forced entry on the door leading to the apartment. This initially led investigators to consider 2 possibilities. Autumn might have let the perpetrator in herself or forgotten to lock the door. Investigations later revealed that neither assumption was correct. The perpetrator had instead climbed to the 3rd floor, starting from the balcony on the 2nd floor, then accessing the apartment Autumn's as the door was open. Along with a DNA sample, the police found fingerprints at the scene and sought to identify the owner. It was 12 days after the body was discovered that the police released the victim's identity in hopes of gathering tips from the public. Anyone with potential information about the case was asked to contact detectives. On the night of the crime, a witness reported seeing a new black SUV, believed to be a Honda Pilot, in the parking lot next to the building. The SUV was present until around 6 a.m. Detectives suspected that the SUV's owner might be connected to Autumn's death, speculating that the perpetrator could have used the vehicle's roof as a stepping point to access the balcony. This building had distinctive protrusions at its corners that could have aided the perpetrator in climbing from the 2nd floor to the 3rd. During their investigation, police analyzed mobile phone activity around Autumn's residence on the night of the incident. The nighttime occurrence actually simplified their task, as most people were asleep, resulting in fewer active phone numbers in the area. Detectives discovered that one of the phone numbers belonged to Autumn's neighbor, Michelle. Although Michelle lived in the same building as Autumn, she said in an interview with police that she knew nothing. However, phone records showed that not only was Michelle on the phone while in her apartment, but she also traveled throughout the city multiple times. Additionally, she had turned off her phone around the time of the incident. While the phone's location indicated she was either in or near her apartment at the time, the exact location was difficult to pinpoint due to the inherent margin of error in location tracking. Detectives went back to question Michelle again, sensing she was hiding something about the case. At first, she denied knowing or hearing anything, but when police warned her that withholding information could make her an accomplice, she opened up. Michelle revealed that around 2 a.m., a man named Jitesh Bogle contacted her and her boyfriend, seeking to buy an illicit substance and was interested in hiring an escort girl. Michelle and her boyfriend agreed to meet Jitesh. They first stopped at an ATM, where Jitesh withdrew cash. Then, Jitesh purchased some of the substance from Michelle and her boyfriend, who were its dealers. However, Jitesh asked them to sell him more. Michelle instructed Jitesh to drive to the parking lot near her building. Once they arrived at the building, the three of them took illicit substances. Then, Michelle and her boyfriend decided to steal the remaining drugs and escape, leaving Jitesh behind. Remarkably, before running away, Michelle hid a bag of this addictive substance in her genital area. Although the details of how she did this are not provided, it is an important fact that will become relevant later. According to Michelle, she and her boyfriend grabbed the substance and some of Jitesh's cash and ran to the building's entrance. They then entered their apartment and locked themselves in, remaining quiet and keeping the lights off. Since Jitesh didn't have an electronic key, he was unable to enter the building. He also refrained from shouting or honking his car horn, fearing someone would alert the police. From their apartment window, Michelle and her boyfriend observed shoe marks on the roof of Jitesh's car. Jitesh drove away around 6 a.m. Investigators hypothesized that Jitesh had attempted to sneak into the building to retrieve the stolen substance and money. However, not knowing Michelle's apartment, he likely entered Autumn's apartment by mistake. The police now have the phone number and photo of suspect Jitesh. The image was captured from a bank security camera, where Jitesh had withdrawn cash to purchase the substance, and an ATM camera also took his picture. After verifying the phone number, investigators discovered that he was a 27-year-old Canadian citizen. He worked as a car development engineer in Warren, Michigan, and owned a black Honda Pilot SUV. Initially, Jitesh regularly commuted to Windsor, Canada, by crossing the river via bridge or tunnel. However, authorities tracked his movements, revealing he had left Canada on the morning of June 10, the day Autumn died, and he has not returned to the country since. Following the release of information about a black SUV at Autumn's house, Jitesh sold his vehicle. The Canadian police collaborated with their American counterparts, learning that Jitesh planned to relocate from Michigan to Washington State, where his parents resided in Kent. After relinquishing his job and left Canada, Jitesh's actions raised suspicions. Nevertheless, the police required concrete evidence to make an arrest and facilitate his extradition to Canada. To investigate Autumn's death, the Windsor police sought assistance from the U.S. National Security Agency to track Jitesh's movements. A DNA sample found on Autumn's body likely belonged to the suspect, Jitesh, but a confirmed match was needed. Jitesh, attempting to evade detection, made several attempts to disguise himself. He shaved his beard and wore blue contact lenses to alter his appearance. However, Jitesh eventually made a mistake. During a visit to a bar in Warren, he left behind a used glass, which U.S. agents seized to obtain his DNA. The comparison of Jitesh's DNA to the DNA on Autumn's body took time, but the outcome was predictable. The test confirmed that the DNA on Autumn's body belonged to Jitesh. On August 17, 2018, over 2 months after Autumn's death, Jitesh was arrested at his parents' residence in Kent, Washington. The arrest caught Jitesh off guard, as he seemed to believe he had evaded detection. U.S. authorities have initiated the process of extraditing Jitesh to his home country. In the extradition documents, the prosecutor stated that Jitesh is a threat to society, at risk of fleeing, and unpredictable. Following this development, Canadian police charged Jitesh with the murder of Autumn Taggart. Due to national restrictions, it was not until November 2021 that Jitesh's trial took place. The trial was held across 3 separate courtrooms. In the main courtroom were the judge, the prosecutor, the jury, Jitesh, and Jitesh's defense team, all present for the proceedings. 2 additional courtrooms were equipped with large screens to broadcast the trial to Autumn's family members and other attendees. During the trial, Jitesh pleaded not guilty to the first-degree murder charge. He claimed that Autumn's death was accidental. According to Jitesh, on the night in question, Michelle and her boyfriend stole money and an illicit substance from him. The incident upset Jitesh, prompting him to exit his vehicle and pursue Michelle. However, due to his intoxication from consuming a substantial amount of alcohol and substances, Jitesh's memory of that night's incident is very limited. He recalled entering Autumn's apartment after climbing onto the balcony. However, he claimed he mistook her for Michelle, someone he believed had previously robbed him, on he finding Autumn asleep in her bed. Autumn woke up and screamed, but Jitesh immediately ordered her to be quiet. However, she continued to scream, and in an attempt to silence her, he covered her mouth with his hand. Unfortunately, this action caused Autumn to suffocate. Jitesh later claimed that he did not realize he had caused Autumn death until her screaming stopped. He attempted to revive her with CPR, but it was unsuccessful. Additionally, Jitesh did not recall how Autumn sustained genital injuries or how he left her apartment. His lawyers argued that the crime was not premeditated, citing Jitesh's extreme intoxication and inability to control his actions as the reason. According to them, his actions, including covering Autumn's mouth to silence her, were not a deliberate to take her life. According to defense attorney Peter Thorning, Jitesh was too drunk to fully understand the consequences of his actions. Peter emphasized that Jitesh's behavior could be attributed to his intoxication, and that the tragic outcome was unintentional, stating, "Sometimes terrible things happen without us intending the result, and that is what happened in this case." The lawyers pointed out a crucial aspect of the case: there was no evidence that Jitesh had engaged in intercourse with Autumn. This detail is significant, as it could impact Jitesh's sentence. Although Jitesh's DNA was found on Autumn's body, it was not seminal fluid. The lawyers argued that the appearance Jitesh's DNA could be the result of cross-contamination, where DNA is transferred from one surface to another. This could have occurred through the gloves of a forensic expert, for example. Jitesh's lawyers attempted to prove that John Lord, who worked in the forensic unit during the investigation, mishandled evidence and accidentally transferred their Jitesh's DNA to Autumn's body. John Lord's responsibilities included photographing the crime scene and collecting evidence that came into direct contact with Autumn. The defense lawyer, Peter Thorning, suggested that John Lord may have caused cross-contamination by rotating the body on the bed sheet, which was seized as evidence. This action could have resulted in the transfer of DNA or fluids between the body and the sheet. During cross-examination, John Lord testified. Peter Thorning asked John Lord if he had received proper training to work as a forensic identification expert. John Lord replied that he had taken precautions to prevent cross-contamination by changing gloves between handling each piece of evidence and using his camera to take photographs. John Lord searched Autumn's room for fluids such as urine, saliva, and semen. The reason for this search is that the likelihood of a sexual assault is higher when the victim is female. During the trial, John Lord testified that he found no indication of a sexual assault based on his search for fluids. John Lord stated in court that his investigation did not reveal any signs of a sexual assault on or around Autumn's body. He also did not find any evidence of a struggle. According to John Lord, a typical struggle usually leaves behind signs such as forced entry, tampered locks, or blood spatter, but none of these indicators were found at the crime scene. In contrast, the prosecutor offered a different perspective. Referencing a past instance where Michelle hid a substance in her genital area, the prosecutor suggested that the defendant knew about this and searched Autumn's body in the same area. He claimed that even though Jitesh used his hand, the act was still a form of assault. The prosecutor expressed strong disapproval of Jitesh's actions. During questioning by the prosecutor, Jitesh was asked why he did not immediately call 911 when Autumn stopped breathing. Jitesh responded, he disagreed, although the context of this response is unclear. Jitesh expressed his fear that the police would not believe him if he reported what happened. During his testimony, Jitesh admitted that he had limited recollection of the incident that transpired in Autumn's room. However, he specifically remembered performing CPR on Autumn after she stopped screaming, which involved administering 15 chest compressions and 3 rescue breaths. The prosecutor questioned Jitesh's claim that the strangulation of Autumn was accidental. The prosecutor argued that if the defendant's intention was simply to silence Autumn, he could have achieved this by covering her mouth, rather than also closing her nose. This deliberate action, the prosecutor suggested, indicates that the defendant understood the consequences of his actions. Autumn's son, Gavin, also provided testimony during the trial. Gavin's testimony was given in a separate room from the main courtroom, accompanied by a support worker. Gavin said someone came into his room and spoke to him, but he doesn't remember what they said. The person stood close to him, but they didn't touch him. After they left, Gavin heard his mother screaming in the distance. This part of the experience felt like a dream, but eventually it stopped and he fell asleep again. And he woke up in the morning. The next morning, Gavin went to his mother's room and found it in disarray. Everything was knocked over, broken, or destroyed. At first, he thought his mother was just sleeping, but then Gavin noticed blood on her nose and realized that she was actually dead. He was in shock and couldn't process what he was seeing. Despite feeling overwhelmed, Gavin tried to cope with the situation by carrying on with his day as usual. Gavin recalls spending part of that day playing games and watching YouTube videos. It wasn't until later in the day, June 10, 2018, that he finally mustered the courage to send a message to his father using his mother's phone. He couldn't keep what had happened to myself any longer and needed to tell someone. Chris Sherwin, Autumn Taggart's ex-husband and the father of Gavin, testified about his last contact with her. He received a text message from her around 12:30 a.m. on June 10th. When he sent another text message the next morning, there was no response. This is when he began to worry. Later, he received a text message from Autumn's phone, which turned out to be from their son. A copy of these text messages was presented in court for the jury to examine. On December 1, 2021, a 12-member jury found Jitesh Bogle of first-degree murder, but they did not find sufficient evidence that he had intercourse with Autumn. On January 5, 2022, the court sentenced Jitesh Bogle to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Jitesh appeared in jail via video, dressed in an orange jumpsuit and wearing a black mask. He sat with his back against a wall, away from the camera. When the judge asked if he wanted to say anything, he expressed his feelings of sorrow and remorse. Jitesh said, "He find it difficult to put into words the sorrow and remorse he feel." Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Ryan Widmer. Sarah and Ryan Widmer met at a favorite coffee shop. Ryan ordered a cup of coffee while Sarah was waiting in line, and happened to see a book on his table that she had just finished reading. Their shared interest in literature opened up their first conversation. Gradually, they spent many hours discussing common topics such as books, movies, music, and daily routines. Through the conversation, they discovered that they both loved nature, travel, and animals. After each meeting, their relationship became closer and more trusting of each other. Their understanding and trust grew more and more. Finally, their relationship developed into love. After a few months of dating, Ryan proposed to Sarah at a romantic sunset at the same coffee shop where they met. Sarah felt very happy and agreed to the proposal. The young couple planned their wedding and found a 2-story house in Hamilton. Finally, on April 10, 2008, their wedding took place. They chose a small church to hold the wedding ceremony, with the participation of close friends and beloved family. Everything, even the smallest details, was planned by Sarah in a special way. On the important day, Sarah looked gorgeous and beautiful, and Ryan couldn't take his eyes off her. After the wedding and the party, the couple decided to go on a honeymoon to the Hawaiian Islands, where they spent 2 weeks exploring the beautiful paradise and enjoying time together. At this time, they were deeply in love and had already planned for the future, dreaming of having children. On the evening of Monday, August 11, 2008, after finishing work at the dental clinic, Sarah met Ryan at a cafe. They had dinner and talked happily. After that, they walked home. Sarah packed her groceries and sat down on the couch. Ryan brought her a glass of water and a headache pill. He gave her a bath, and they finished watching their favorite TV show together. Sarah went upstairs to the bedroom. She undressed, folded her clothes neatly, prepared a towel, lit a scented candle, and turned on her favorite music. Ryan pressed the button on the TV remote, pausing a few times on the football game. He lay on the couch for no more than 10 minutes. He called his wife, but Sarah didn't hear him, so he slowly went upstairs. In the bedroom, Ryan turned on the TV and called Sarah again. There was silence. In a panic, he went into the bathroom, where he found Sarah lying face down in the bathtub. Ryan unplugged the bathtub and took out his phone to call 911. At 10:49 p.m., under the direction of the police, Ryan finally got Sarah out of the bathtub and performed CPR on her. Within 6 minutes, an ambulance and police were at Ryan's home. An initial inspection of the scene caught the attention of the police. The bathroom was dry and clean, with no signs of water or scattered objects. Sarah was lying on the bedroom floor, naked, her skin dry. Only her wet hair suggested she had drowned. A paramedic performed CPR when there was no pulse. A pinkish-white fluid flowed from Sarah's nose and mouth. 2 attempts to intubate Sarah while she was lying on the bedroom floor were unsuccessful. Sarah was then rushed to the emergency room and 2 more attempts were made to bring her heart rate back to normal with a defibrillator, both unsuccessful. During this time, Ryan remained by his wife's side. Within 20 minutes of arriving at the hospital, they attempted to revive Sarah, but at 11:41 p.m., an emergency room doctor pronounced her dead. Ryan knelt in the hospital hallway and cried. Relatives and friends of the couple could not have imagined that just 4 months after their wedding, a tragedy would strike that would shock the entire city and make Ryan the prime suspect in Sarah's death. When the police questioned him at the hospital, Ryan's initial statements raised suspicions. Ryan claimed that he and his wife had been home that night. They had dined out, returned home, and watched TV. Then, because his wife had a headache, Ryan gave her painkillers and led her to the bathroom. Some details in Ryan's statement did not match the emergency call records. The victim had collapsed face down, while Ryan said his wife was lying face up. This discrepancy made the police question Ryan's statement. Ryan was deeply shocked by what had happened. He kept calling Sarah's name. Under pressure from the police, Ryan was forced to participate in the investigation to find out information about Sarah's death. He agreed to allow his house to be searched. Analysis of the medication Sarah had taken showed that it was a common painkiller commonly used to treat headaches and migraines. However, she had been taking a course of medication that altered her hormones and caused her to fall into an uncontrollable sleep. After searching the house, traces of blood were found on the carpet. During the investigation, the police discovered several signs that made them suspicious of Ryan's story. When they arrived at the scene, the bathtub and tiles were dry with no signs of water. No wet items, clothing, or other items were found in the house that could have soaked up the water. The autopsy revealed that Sarah had several injuries to her body, including bruises to her head, neck, armpits, and lips. However, there were no signs of a struggle or resistance. Sarah's fingernails were intact, not broken or chipped. This does not fit the theory that Sarah was murdered after a struggle. Sarah's autopsy, conducted by Dr. Russell Appointment Grove, showed that she died of drowning. During the autopsy, experts also discovered multiple muscle hemorrhages in the front of her neck and bruises on her head. These injuries were determined to have occurred before her death. However, the cause of these injuries is still unknown. Toxicology tests ruled out the presence of illegal substances or alcohol in Sarah's blood. This makes the question of what caused her death even more difficult to answer. On August 13, 2008, Ryan was arrested on suspicion of murdering his wife. The charge was based on the emergency call, a scene that did not match the reality, and the injuries on Sarah's body. This was enough to charge him with murdering his wife. Ryan and Sarah were very much in love, as friends and neighbors confirmed. They never argued or fought in public and always planned their lives. What caused Sarah's death? In March 2009, the first trial began with emergency line officer Ron Cronenberger taking the stand. He described the phone conversation with Ryan as calm and relaxed. However, Ron Cronenberger also said that Ryan appeared to be just blowing into the tube, pretending to perform CPR. The prosecution argued that the information from the 911 call, the scene, and Sarah's injuries were enough to prove that Ryan killed her by forcing her underwater and drowning her in the bathtub. The main piece of evidence in the case was the bathtub. Police examined the bathtub for fingerprints and found what they believed to be human handprints. These were located closer to the middle of the bathtub. Using a reflective ultraviolet photographic process, fingerprints and stains were found on the bathtub. A fingerprint was found on the forearm, and hair follicle testing determined that it was left by an adult male, but the age of the fingerprint could not be determined. The police called in a medical expert, who testified that falling asleep and dying in a bathtub was unlikely unless illegal drugs or alcohol were involved. According to the expert, the sensation of water on the face could have awakened the person or triggered a reflex response to the airway. Otherwise, the reduction in oxygen in the muscles would have likely awakened the victim. In addition, the pathologist who performed the autopsy was called to testify. He stated that if Sarah had a dry body and wet hair, a likely explanation would be that her head had been pushed off the edge of the bathtub, toilet, or sink. She could have been pushed forward or backward, in running water or in a full bathtub. According to the prosecution's case, Ryan held Sarah's head underwater until she drowned, and on that basis, he should be convicted. Ryan's defense attorney argued that he was innocent, and that he had no motive to kill Sarah. The attorney said that if there had been a violent struggle, as the prosecution argued, there would have been evidence of that. However, there were no injuries on Ryan, and Sarah's fingernails were not broken or chipped. The attorney said that the injuries found on Sarah were the result of prolonged CPR, direct cardiac massage, and multiple attempts at intubation that night in the house, in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, and at the hospital itself. At the defense's request, a second autopsy was performed. Dr. Werner Spitz performed a second autopsy and again confirmed that the cause of death was drowning. He observed injuries to her neck, arms, upper lip, skull, a lacerated liver, and bleeding from her neck, but could not determine whether these injuries were due to CPR. Those present argued that the paramedics had been trying to resuscitate Sarah for about 45 minutes and that the deep bleeding inside Sarah's neck could have been caused by N4 being inserted into the area because paramedics could not reach the veins in her arms. Instead of ruling it a homicide, Dr. Werner Spitz ruled Sarah's death undetermined. The defense said her skin was dry because it dries faster than her hair. They also said that when Ryan found his wife unconscious, he pushed the drain in the bathtub, tried to help her, and called emergency services. This chain of events explains why her body was drier than expected. The water had drained out of the bathtub even before Ryan called 911. However, it is not yet known whether the jury's verdict would have changed if they had received credible evidence that Sarah's medical condition could have caused the drowning. The official reason for denying a new trial was that the jury had made errors in its investigation. Ryan was surprised when Jennifer Cruz came to the prosecutor's office to testify about Ryan's guilt. She said she was friends with Ryan and that he had been in regular contact with her by phone or email. According to Jennifer's testimony, he called on October 26, 2009, at 11:09 p.m. In a very upset voice, he told her that he had beaten Sarah in the living room on the day of her death. Sarah had discovered his infidelity and had seen inappropriate photos. They had argued for a long time, first downstairs and then in the bedroom. Ryan pushed her into the bathroom and left his wife there without checking to see what had happened to her. He was angry, and after calming down, he found Sarah floating in a bathtub full of water. To cover his tracks, he wiped up the water on the bathroom floor with a towel and came up with a plan for the accident. Ryan's attorneys worked hard to prove his innocence. They tried to throw out Jennifer's testimony because they thought it was unreasonable. One obvious example was that no towels were found in the house, including the dryer. And there was no evidence of infidelity in their marriage. The family had no financial problems and never argued. Ryan was described by friends as a kind and helpful person who never showed anger. Ryan would not benefit from his wife's death because he did not have a life insurance policy. Before the third trial began, Jennifer was discredited and barred from testifying. The call that Ryan allegedly confessed to her was not authenticated. In January 2011, a trial was held based on new evidence. The defense argued that Sarah had underlying medical conditions that could have caused her to suddenly lose consciousness and drown. Several medical experts testified in support of the defense, stating that some heart or neurological defect could have led to the loss of consciousness. However, the state's medical experts disagreed with this assessment. The trial also revealed additional details about Sarah's health and daily routine. Her co-workers testified that she often slept in her car before going to work at the dental office due to severe allergies and stomach aches. On the day of her death, Sarah had complained of headaches and stomach aches to her dentist boss. That evening, Sarah talked to a friend and mentioned her headaches and neck pain, and her friend said she looked extremely tired. Her ability to fall asleep quickly led her friends to think she might have narcolepsy. Narcolepsy is a sleep disorder characterized by excessive daytime sleepiness. People with narcolepsy often have difficulty staying awake and need to take frequent naps to cope. However, Sarah's mother, Ruth Ann Stewart, disputed this idea when she testified as a prosecution witness at trial. She claimed that she had never seen her daughter have sleep problems and described Sarah as a healthy and active child with a regular daily routine. Sarah's medical records also supported this claim. As a dental hygienist, Sarah had undergone regular checkups and her last checkup showed no signs of health problems. In addition, other witnesses who claimed Sarah was excessively sleepy gave unconvincing testimony. In cases where a person tries to strangle another from behind, the victim often suffers defensive injuries to the arms and legs, as well as injuries to the small bones in the neck. However, Sarah's autopsy did not show any such injuries. The defense urged the jury to consider all the facts surrounding the case, that Ryan had no reason to harm Sarah. Once again, the defense was defeated. After about 12 hours of deliberations, Ryan was convicted of murder and sentenced to 15 years in prison. The jury based their decision on the lack of water on Sarah's body and around the bathtub, and that Ryan's call to 911 was staged. One juror felt that Ryan's demeanor in court was one of the main reasons he believed Ryan was guilty. When the autopsy photos were shown, they felt that Ryan was completely unresponsive. Ryan did not take a stand, although he told the court after the verdict was announced, he loved his wife. He did not hurt her. Ryan remains in custody, awaiting a federal court ruling that could determine his parole status. After 14 years in prison, his first chance for parole will be in July 2025. With each passing year, Ryan holds out hope that the next year will bring him freedom. He continues to maintain his innocence and profess his love for Sarah, insisting that he did not harm her. Ryan's chances of parole in 2025 appear slim, as the parole board tends to favor inmates who show remorse. Since Ryan has always maintained his innocence, he could face an uphill battle for parole. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Allison Baden-Clay. Allison Baden-Clay was born on July 1, 1968 in a suburb of Brisbane. She grew up in a wealthy family and developed a love for ballet from an early age. After completing her schooling, she pursued further studies and proved herself to be an excellent student, fluent in 6 languages. In 1993, at the age of 25, Allison entered a local beauty pageant, where she impressed the audience with her ballet skills. She then began her professional career in the Human Resources Department at the Brisbane Flight Centre. Here, her career progressed rapidly after her talent was recognized by her boss. It was while working at the center that she met her future husband, Gerard. Gerard Baden-Clay was born on September 9, 1970 in Bournemouth, United Kingdom. Gerard comes from a distinguished lineage, with his great-grandfather, Robert Baden-Powell, a prominent British military leader and founder of the Scouting movement. Gerard moved to Zambia with his family when he was 1 year old, as it was the homeland of his father, Nigel Clay. They remained in Zambia for 8 years before migrating to Australia. Gerard then completed his studies in Australia, graduating with a degree in accounting. He eventually joined the Brisbane Flight Centre, where he met Allison. Gerard met Allison at the Brisbane Flight Centre, marking the beginning of their romance. They married on August 23, 1997, and then went on a trip around the world, visiting several countries including South America and Switzerland, with a temporary stay in London. When they returned to Australia, Allison returned to work at the Flight Centre, eventually being promoted to a management position. In 2002, Allison became pregnant and gave birth to her first child, a daughter named Hannah. After Hannah was born, Allison decided to focus solely on raising her children and taking care of her family. Gerard made several career changes during this time and opened a luxury real estate company in Brisbane in 2004. With the help of his parents, he invested a lot of time and effort into the business. The Gerard family had a second daughter, Sarah, born in 2004, followed by their youngest child, Ella, born in 2006. The family lived in a rented house in Brookfield, a suburb of Brisbane. Meanwhile, Allison spent most of her time looking after the girls at home. Over time, Allison began to notice that Gerard was increasingly distant from her. This eventually led to a shocking confession that he no longer loved her. Gerard's behavior towards Allison changed dramatically. He constantly criticized her, complaining about the meals she cooked and the cleanliness of the house. He called her lazy and said she was no longer attractive to him. Allison chose to remain silent in the face of these hurtful comments. In her diary, she poured out her heart, expressing her enduring love for Gerard, their frequent arguments, her feelings of guilt, and her determination to change to win his love back. Allison hid her family troubles behind a cheerful exterior, making her appear to be a warm, caring person, a devoted mother, and a loving wife. However, her family life took a difficult turn in 2011. Gerard's business suffered after the Queensland floods, resulting in a significant debt of around $1 million Australian dollars. That same year, in October, Allison discovered that Gerard was secretly having an affair with Tony McHugh, a co-worker. Gerard and Tony met in 2008 when Tony was a client, and Gerard hired her. At the time, Tony was having marital problems after 17 years of marriage, which eventually led to Tony's divorce. Tony knew Gerard was married, but Gerard said that the relationship with Allison was loveless and that he was only staying for their daughter. Gerard promised Tony a future together and that he would marry her. In October 2011, Allison discovered that Gerard was having an affair with Tony. Gerard immediately ended the relationship and severed ties with Tony by firing her from his real estate company and reconciled with Allison. Tony still harbored hopes for a future with Gerard. 4 months later, in April 2012, Tony and Gerard were talking on the phone while Tony was driving home. They discussed an upcoming real estate conference and Gerard casually mentioned that Tony would be meeting Allison there the next day. This revelation upset Tony, causing her to question the promises he had made to her and to call him dishonest. Gerard apologized to Tony, reaffirmed his love for her, and reiterated his commitment to ending his marriage to Allison within 3 months. The following morning, April 20th, at 7:14 a.m., Gerard contacted the police in a distressed state, reporting that Allison had gone missing after going for a walk around 10 p.m. the night before. When police arrived at Gerard's home, they noticed deep, curved scratches on his face, which he claimed he had sustained while shaving. Further examination revealed small red marks on his chest, which Gerard explained were from a moth bite he had encountered while changing an outdoor light. A search of the house revealed no signs of a disturbance. Everything was in order, and the bed was made. Despite his stress, Gerard appeared calm and began getting his daughters ready for school and daycare. Police interviewed Hannah, Sarah, and Ella, who reported falling asleep after their mother turned off the lights and had not seen her since. During questioning, the crying girls described their parents as a happy and generally harmonious couple. Police searched the area and spoke to neighbors, but no one witnessed anything unusual. The only initial clues found were a small bloodstain on Allison's car and a strand of her hair in the trunk. A large-scale search operation soon followed, with rescue teams and volunteers searching woods, wells, manholes, and dams near the Allison family home. To aid the search efforts, a mannequin was placed wearing an outfit similar to Allison's last known outfit to aid the search efforts. As time went on, the chances of finding Allison alive diminished. Her friends clung to hope, not wanting to think the worst. Gerard appeared visibly upset as he tearfully pleaded with his wife to return, in front of the media. Behind the scenes, however, he instructed his lover, Tony, to keep quiet and put their relationship on hold, promising to reunite in the future. 10 days after Allison went missing, a boater made a horrifying discovery on the banks of Colorado Creek, about 8 miles from the Allison family home, on April 30th, 2012. The body was found in an advanced state of decomposition. The day after Allison's body was discovered, Gerard contacted his insurance company to inquire about filing an $800,000 life insurance claim on his wife. A medical examiner later formally identified the body as Allison Baden-Clay, 43, using dental records. Notably, Allison was still wearing the same clothes she had been wearing when she went missing. A post-mortem examination found that Allison's death was likely due to strangulation. Her death was therefore classified as a homicide, although determining the exact cause was difficult due to the advanced stage of decomposition of the body. On May 11, 2012, St. Paul's Cathedral in Brisbane held a funeral for Allison Baden-Clay, who had tragically passed away. Her husband, Gerard, was visibly overcome with emotion, crying throughout the service as he consoled his daughters and consoled Allison's parents. Hundreds of people attended the service. However, while Gerard was apparently mourning his wife's death, he was secretly communicating with his mistress, Tony, through public phone calls. He informed her of Allison's passing and urged her to keep their affair a secret from the police investigation. Meanwhile, the police began to question the story Gerard had given them. He claimed that Allison had gone for a walk around 10 p.m. and was gone when he woke up. However, conflicting evidence emerged. Police found that Gerard had charged his phone at 2 a.m. and was on his computer at 5 a.m., and forensic analysis showed that the marks on his cheeks were consistent with fingernail scratches. In addition, no blood was found on his razor. A biologist disputed Gerard's explanation of the caterpillar bites on his chest, stating that no caterpillars in the family's area could have caused such injuries. A separate expert examined Allison's hair and found 5 different types of leaves: eucalyptus, Chinese elm, myrtle, cat's claw vine, and herringbone fern. 2 of these, eucalyptus and Chinese elm, were found growing directly under the bridge where Allison's body was discovered. In addition, all 5 types of leaves and thorns were found in the Allison family's backyard. On June 13, 2012, a month after Allison's funeral, 41-year-old Gerard Badenclay was arrested and charged with his wife's murder. He maintained his innocence and claimed he would fight the charges and applied for bail, which was immediately denied due to concerns that he might flee. During the investigation, police spoke to Tony, who revealed their 4-year secret relationship to Gerard. It was also discovered that just days before Allison went missing, Gerard had sent Tony a letter promising to be with Tony on July 1st. Further complicating the case. The prosecution's theory was that Gerard had killed his wife, Allison, to collect life insurance money and pay off debts. They believed he also planned to move on with Tony McHugh. According to their theory, a fight broke out on the evening of April 19, 2012, while Gerard and Allison were watching TV after their daughters had gone to bed. During the argument, Allison allegedly scratched Gerard's cheek, leaving her fingernails to collect DNA evidence. Unfortunately, the DNA had degraded, making it impossible to determine its source. The prosecution claimed that Gerard strangled Allison, then dragged her body through the backyard, leaving her hair tangled with leaves. Gerard placed her body in the trunk of his car and drove to a nearby river, where he dumped her body under a bridge. The prosecution believed that Gerard thought the river would wash her body away, effectively covering up his crime. Gerard then allegedly returned home, charged his phone, cleaned the house, and reported Allison missing the next morning. After finding Allison's body, Gerard hired a criminal defense attorney and went to see him. During Gerard's 2014 murder trial for Allison, prosecutors were convinced that Gerard was guilty and argued that he had killed her. However, Gerard maintained that he had nothing to do with her death. He admitted that he and Allison had argued and suggested that she may have left the house late one night because she was depressed and may have taken her own life. However, Allison's family and friends rejected this idea. They were certain that Allison would never leave her daughters, as she loved them very much. Her friends had long spoken out against Gerard, describing him as arrogant, fake, and self-centered. They believed that Allison's deep love for him blinded her to these negative traits. During the trial, excerpts from Allison's diary were presented as evidence. The diary revealed how isolated she felt and how controlling Gerard was, especially after the birth of their first child. She described feeling trapped at home and detailed several instances of Gerard's controlling behavior. This included insulting her, monitoring her conversations with a baby monitor, controlling her finances, deleting relatives' contact details from her phone and blocking their calls. After Allison's death, Gerard's attempts to make an insurance claim were rejected, with the money being withheld until the trial was over. Another important testimony came from Melissa Romano, who had never met Gerard in person but had spoken to him on the phone in 2009 about a real estate deal. She testified that after the deal was finalized, Gerard called her out of the blue, suggesting, "I'm looking for someone to kill my wife." Melissa, stunned, questioned his motives, but Gerard abruptly redirected the conversation and ended the call. This testimony played a key role in the case against Gerard, which on July 15, 2014, Gerard Badenclay was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 15 years. In 2015, Gerard appealed his conviction, and the court reclassified the crime to involuntary manslaughter, shortening his prison term. However, the decision sparked widespread outrage, with around 4,000 people demonstrating in support of Allison's family. In response to public sentiment, in 2016, Australia's High Court overturned the Court of Appeal's decision, reinstating the original murder conviction. As a result, Gerard will not be eligible for parole until at least 2027. During his incarceration, Gerard initially behaved like a model prisoner. However, over time, he adapted to prison life and became less restrained in his behavior, leading to an incident where he clashed with a prison guard, which resulted in a stern reprimand. Following Gerard Baden-Clay's trial, his former lover, Tony McHugh, moved to Bali, where she spent her time teaching and doing charity work. 4 years later, she moved to the United Arab Emirates to continue her education career. Tony now lives a private life, keeping her personal information private. She occasionally connects with friends on social media using a private account, as she fears that Gerard may try to find her after his release. In a recent public statement, Tony expressed remorse for her actions and clarified that she never intended to cause Allison any harm. Allison's daughters Hannah, Sarah and Ella Baden-Clay are living with her parents. Allison's assets, including her insurance money, have been passed on to her children. After completing her university studies in 2022, Hannah has followed in her mother's footsteps by pursuing a career in dance. In memory of her sister Allison, Vanessa set up a charity to combat domestic violence and support those affected, while raising awareness of the issue. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Tracy Hallett and J.B. Beasley. J.B. Beasley was born on July 31, 1981, in Troy, Alabama, to Cheryl and Hilton Lanier J.B. After her parents divorced in 1984, J.B. moved to Dothan with her mother. Her mother later married Joey Begun, who became J.B.'s loving stepfather, and she and her 4 sisters grew up in a house in Dothan. She was an outgoing girl who enjoyed a variety of activities, including cheerleading, dance lessons, playing the piano, and swimming. J.B. and her sisters also modeled for several companies. During high school, she met Tracy Hallett, with whom she quickly formed a close friendship. Tracy was born on March 3, 1982, to Carolyn and Robert Hallett, a police officer with the Dothan Police Department. Her life took a dramatic turn when her father died when Tracy was 5 years old. Her mother then married Mike Roberts, who raised Tracy with her mother. Unlike her friend J.B., Tracy was shy but always put others before herself. As the eldest in the family, she took her responsibilities very seriously, especially when it came to her 2 younger brothers. Tracy attended Northview High School, excelling in her studies and participating in extracurricular activities as a cheerleader, often with J.B. As the 2 girls began to enter adulthood, they had no idea of the tragic fate that awaited them. On July 31, 1999, J.B. and Tracy set off from Dothan in J.B.'s 1993 Mazda 929 to attend a birthday party in Headland, a town just a few miles north. However, unfamiliar with the roads, the 2 young women soon found themselves in trouble. Just minutes after starting their journey from home, they became lost. At approximately 10:30 p.m., J.B. and Tracy stopped at a BP gas station in Headland to ask for directions. The gas station was located near the intersection of routes 173 and 431. Using the pay phone at the gas station, they called their friends to get a better idea of how to get to the party. However, after driving on, J.B. and Tracy found themselves in Ozark, Alabama, about 24 miles northwest of Headland, instead of their intended destination. Still confused about the directions, the girls stopped at the Big Little store at 11:30 p.m. Although the store was closed, they used the pay phone to make another call. This time, Tracy called her mother to tell them they were lost, in Ozark, and planning to return home. A woman, Marilyn Merritt, and her daughters then stopped at a gas station to buy a soda. Tracy and JB approached them and asked for directions to Dothan. Marilyn explained the route as best she could, and the girls seemed to understand. She found the girls polite and well-mannered and noted that their car was clean. Marilyn recalled that the girls left the parking lot and turned right, as she had instructed. However, at that time, JB and Tracy had not returned home. The next morning, August 1, 1999, around 8 a.m., Tracy's mother contacted the police to report her daughter missing. Police soon discovered their first clue regarding the girl's disappearance. After Tracy was reported missing, police found JB's car on Herring Avenue in Ozark. What was unusual about the discovery was that the car's gas tank, which had been full the day before, was now nearly empty. The car showed signs of having been driven in muddy conditions, but the doors had been locked, although the driver's side window was partially rolled down. There was no evidence of forced entry. Inside, police found JB's driver's license on the dashboard, as well as the girls' wallets, which still contained cash. However, the car keys were missing, and neither Tracy nor JB were found. A fingerprint on the locked trunk lid led police to believe something was seriously wrong. As they surveyed the scene, they suspected the trunk might contain vital clues but were hampered by the lack of a key. However, after 6 hours of investigation, they found an interior latch that allowed them to open the trunk without a key. When police opened the trunk, they made a horrifying discovery: the bodies of 2 girls inside. Both victims were fully clothed, but their pants were soiled from the waist down. Each had been shot once in the head. An autopsy revealed that Tracy had been shot in the temple, while JB had been shot in the right cheek. Tracy's body also showed a 9mm shell casing in her leg, scratches on her arm, and spikes stuck in her jeans. JB's clothes, especially her new shoes, were muddy and dirty. Police discovered that the 2 girls had likely been shot inside the trunk, although initial signs suggested an execution-style killing. After notifying their families of the discovery, an official murder investigation was launched. Police found the girls' wallets, jewelry, money, and credit cards still in the car, indicating that this was not a robbery. Autopsies revealed no alcohol or drugs in the victims' systems. Additionally, the autopsies confirmed that neither girl had been sexually assaulted before her death, ruling out a sexual motive. 2 months after Tracy and JB's murders, the State Crime Lab released a report revealing the presence of unidentified semen on JB's clothing and skin. Despite this new evidence, the fingerprints found on the trunk lid remained a mystery, as there was no match in the database. With no clear leads, the investigation stalled. As news of the girls' deaths spread rapidly, police still had few leads to identify a suspect. A reward was also offered to try to gather information related to the murders, but no new leads were discovered. However, police soon received an unexpected breakthrough in the case. A month after the discovery of JB and Tracy's bodies, Johnny William Barentine, 28, a longtime resident of Ozark, came forward to the local police department on September 1st. Johnny claimed to have witnessed the girls' murders. He testified that on the night of the murders, he had gone out to buy milk for his 2-year-old son around the time Tracy called from the Big Little Store pay phone. At 1 a.m., Johnny returned home visibly upset and initially told his wife that he had been hit by a black truck near Herring Road. However, during a 4-hour interview with Ozark police, Johnny gave 6 different accounts of what he knew. He initially told Ozark Police Chief Tony R. Spivey that he saw a black truck speeding away from the area where the girls' bodies were discovered. Unfortunately, his story continued to change and contradict throughout the interviews. Johnny initially claimed that he picked up a tattooed stranger and drove to the Big Little Store. He later said that the stranger got into a car with 2 girls, whom he recognized as the 2 girls who were later found dead. Johnny said that the group drove to Herring Avenue, where the stranger forced the girls out of the car, leading to a struggle as the girls tried to escape. According to Johnny's statement, after witnessing a confrontation, he saw something in the stranger's hand just before hearing 2 gunshots. Johnny then drove the stranger away from the scene before returning home. However, in a conflicting version of events, Johnny admitted to police that he actually knew the stranger he picked up, identifying him as a neighbor who lived nearby. Notably, Johnny's home was less than a mile from where police discovered the victims' bodies. Johnny's story was not convincing to police, and he became the prime suspect in the murders of JB and Tracy. As a result, Ozark police quickly arrested him and charged him with 2 counts of attempted murder. However, several issues with his testimony raised suspicions. Notably, Johnny did not mention any sexual activity that would explain the presence of semen on JB's clothes and body. Additionally, the neighbor he accused had a solid alibi for the time. Johnny initially confessed to making up the entire story to collect the reward money. Despite his admission, the police believed they had the right suspect. At a preliminary hearing on September 21, Alabama Bureau of Investigation Special Agent Charles Huggins testified that Johnny accurately described the victim's clothing and other relevant details, indicating that he was indeed present at the crime scene. Then, at a bail hearing on October 18, Johnny gave another testimony. He proclaimed his innocence, saying that he never picked up a man with a tattoo or witnessed anything on the night of the murder. According to Johnny, he went to the store around 11 p.m. to buy milk for his son and then made up the story to get a reward. The judge denied him bail and he was sent back to the Dale County Jail in Ozark. Throughout this time, Johnny's family members remained supportive of him. They gave interviews to the media, expressing their belief in his innocence and stating that he was incapable of harming anyone. Johnny's attorney, Bill Kimmons, argued that his client had no involvement in the murders of Tracy and JB, emphasizing that the 4-hour interrogation had affected Johnny, who was trapped in his own false confession. Johnny's defense also pointed out that he had only completed 7th grade and part of 8th grade. He said his client was in special education, suggesting he was incapable of planning the heinous crime. After further investigation, it was discovered that Johnny's DNA did not match the semen found on the victim's body and clothing. As a result, he was released from prison on December 17, 1999. In January 2000, a Dale County grand jury chose not to indict Johnny, officially clearing him of any suspects in the murders of Tracy and JB. This development led to a setback in the investigation, with criticism directed at the police methods used and doubts raised about the Ozark Police's ability to handle the case. However, police continued to focus on other potential suspects. During the investigation, a man from Michigan was identified as the prime suspect. He had attended a party the night of the murders near the area and JB's car was later found. The man had left town shortly after the murders, raising suspicion. Police interviewed him 3 times in Michigan but were unable to provide a clear explanation for the 3 to 4 hour gap in his alibi for the night of the murder. However, these statements were never made public by police. The case against him was eventually dropped after DNA evidence proved his innocence. Another key lead police are investigating is the driver of a small white pickup truck that was spotted at the Big Little store. Security footage captured the truck at the gas station when JB and Tracy stopped to call Tracy's mother from a payphone. The video quality was poor and did not show the driver or anyone getting in or out of the truck. It was impossible to follow a digital trail, as there was no record of gas being purchased at the gas station at the time. After releasing photos of the truck to the media, police asked the public for information, but as leads went cold, the driver and truck were never found. The last potential lead was a Mississippi man who had been extradited to Ozark from Jones County on an unrelated charge of possession of drug paraphernalia. The man had stayed with relatives in Ozark for a short time before leaving town 2 days after the murder, prompting police to question him. However, the questioning yielded no significant information and, without evidence, they were forced to release him. A woman contacted police in March 2000, reporting that she had heard screaming and 2 gunshots on the night of July 31, 1999, near Highway 123 South, just inside the city limits. When asked about her delayed report, she explained that she feared being implicated. Police searched the area thoroughly based on her description and found a 9mm bullet, the same caliber used in the murders of Tracy and JB. However, the make of the bullet did not match the brand of the shell casing found on Tracy's body. Furthermore, the bullet had no markings that could be used to forensically compare it to other evidence in the case. Unfortunately, this lead ended up being another dead end for the police. Several leads in the JB and Tracy case eventually ran into dead ends, but police were determined to find a DNA match. As JB and Tracy's grieving families tried to move on with their lives, the case went cold. Years later, however, a dramatic development reignited the investigation. A major breakthrough came in 2015 when Rena, an auxiliary Ozark police officer, came forward and publicly accused an Ozark police officer of killing JB and Tracy and others of covering up the incident. Rena made several serious allegations related to a 1999 incident in Ozark. According to her, a police officer stopped a man named JB on the night of July 31, 1999, looking for cassette tapes containing recordings of conversations. These tapes allegedly implicated Ozark police officers in a cocaine distribution and profiteering scheme. Rena asserted that the search for the tapes ultimately led to the murders of the 2 innocent girls. Rena further alleged that several law enforcement officers knew the identity of the killer but chose to cover it up by destroying evidence. They also allegedly threatened her to keep her from speaking out. She specifically named 3 police officers, Gary Butch Whittington, Rex Tipton, and Eddie Henderson, as harassing and threatening her. Rena further accused then-police Chief Tony Spivey, who led the initial investigation, of being involved in the cover-up. However, she did not reveal the identity of the specific police officer she believed was responsible for the murders. Noted American journalist and newspaper editor John B. Carroll wrote an article discussing the case. John B. believes that the officer involved thought that Tracy and JB would use the tapes as evidence in a trial scheduled for August 2, 1999, just 48 hours after they were killed. However, John B. also claims that Rena was severely beaten with a baseball bat after speaking out, which prevented her from naming the real killer. The officers Rena accused all denied any involvement in the murders of JB and Tracy. Without any physical evidence, none of them were ever officially named as suspects in the case. Regardless, the allegations exploded on numerous true crime websites and social media, leading to a defamation lawsuit. On January 29, 2016, Keith Coffin, Rex Tipton, Tony Spivey, Eddie Henderson, and Gary Butch Whittington, all Ozark, Alabama police officers, filed a defamation of character lawsuit against Rena Crum, John B. Carroll, and Dean Matthews. That case was dismissed in 2018. In May 2016, Rena Crum was convicted of molesting JB's sister and was given a suspended sentence and a $250 fine. Over the years, police investigated multiple theories, interviewed hundreds of people, and took DNA samples from several suspects, but to no avail. It took 20 years and the advancement of new DNA technology before police were able to make an arrest. In March 2019, police sent DNA found on JB's body in clothing to Virginia-based Parabon Nano Laboratories, which specializes in DNA. Using a public genealogical database to analyze the suspect's DNA and match it to genetic information led police to a breakthrough in the case. The new evidence linked DNA found at the crime scene to a suspect named Coley McCraney, a man in his 40s. At the time, Coley was not a suspect in the 1999 murders of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hallett, but the discovery changed everything. Coley, an Alabama native, had led a relatively normal life before his DNA linked him to the crimes. Born in Alabama, Coley attended and graduated from Carroll High School in Ozark in 1992, where he was an accomplished athlete and served as president of the school's library club. After completing high school, he enlisted in the United States Air Force and served from 1993 to 1997. Coley's personal life involved several marriages. He married his first wife in 1992 but separated 2 years later and eventually divorced. During this time, his ex-wife accused him of assault and filed a complaint with the Air Force. After the divorce, Coley remarried in 2001 and started a family with his second wife. With the exception of a child support issue in 1998, Coley has no prior criminal record or criminal history. Coley spent 20 years as a truck driver for various companies in Alabama. In addition to his trucking career, he recently co-founded a church and served as a bishop. At the time of the murders, Coley was 26 years old and lived on Lisenby Drive in Ozark, about a mile from where J.B. and Tracy's bodies were discovered in 1999. 20 years after the murders, Coley was arrested on March 19, 2019, following a traffic stop in Daleville, Alabama. During an interview with police, Coley claimed that he did not know J.B. and Tracy. Police did not provide any information about his possible motive. Coley's arrest took the Ozark community by surprise, especially Police Chief Marlon Walker, who attended school with him. Rena Crum, 53, who previously accused the Ozark Police Department of covering up the killings, withdrew her charges at a hearing in August 2022. Coley McCraney, 49, is facing 5 counts of attempted murder for the shooting deaths of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hallett and is being held without bail in the Dale County Jail ahead of his trial, which is scheduled for April 17, 2023. At trial, Coley admitted that he knew J.B. He had a conversation with J.B. several weeks before the killings in which she introduced herself as Jennifer at the Wiregrass Commons Mall. He testified that on the day of the killings, he and J.B. had consensual sex in his truck. He said he never knew that Jennifer was J.B. Beasley. On April 26, 2023, a jury found Coley McCraney guilty on all charges and sentenced him to life in prison without parole. In July 2023, a Dale County District Court judge denied Coley's request for a new trial.